Hey folks, this is Marlise. Thank you all so much for bearing with us. We apologize for all of the technical difficulties today, but this is looking much, much better. So we are going to start doing some audio checks here. Yeah, and then we will be able to move forward. So I'm going to go through and just start audio checking some of our. Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Sarah.
Why am I not able to hear you?
Okay, Sarah, I'm going to have Eric chat you and sort out oh, you can't hear me. Okay, I'm going to chat you. In the meantime, folks, Eric and Nicole, could you chat Sarah? And I'm going to go ahead and go through and do some audio checks. Okay, let's try this. Chris Berg, can you hear me?
Yes, I do. Hello.
Okay, success. All right, I'm going to go ahead and remute you. Clint, can you hear me?
I certainly can. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'm going to remute you, Clint.
Hello, this is Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Now I can. Thank you.
Okay, good. My phone thought I said hi, Siri, and it started talking to me.
So. That happens a lot.
Okay, I'm doing audio checks. Miss Cynthia Lewis, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. Okay, I'm going to remute you. Carolyn McLaughlin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. David Makepeace, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. David Vaughn, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, good. Folks, looks like we're having some success here.
Yay, cool.
Miss Elena Rodriguez, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, we can hear you as well. Karen Thurman, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Ken Niedermeyer, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. All right, I'm remuting you, Ken. Ken Rita, can you hear me?
I'm here.
All right. Success. Lisa Mangilia, can you hear me? Oh, okay, let me recheck that. Maybe I didn't unclick you. Oh, there we go. Try again. Lisa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. We can hear you as well.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Michelle Coldiron, can you hear me? Michelle Coldiron, can you hear me? Go back. Mimi Stafford, can you hear me? Mimi Stafford, can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, great. We can hear you as well, Mimi.
good.
Nick Parr, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Richie Gomez, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, great. Shelly Kruger, can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can.
Good. Stephen Patton, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Steve, oh, Steve Leopold, can you hear me? Looks like you're self-muted on your end.
Yeah, I got a little slow on the button. Yes, I hear you fine.
Okay, great. I'm slow on the button as well. Thanks. Susie Rublin, can you hear me? Susie, can you hear me okay? All right, I'm going to circle back around to you, Susie. Okay, folks, I'm going to continue these audio checks here. Ben Dougherty, can you hear me? Ben, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, folks, going through the list here. Dan Dawson, can you hear me? Looks like you're self-muted on your end, Dan.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great, we can hear you as well.
Thank you.
Ed Barham, can you hear me? Edward Barham, can you hear me? Okay, I'll circle back around. Oops. And then I was muted again, folks. Heather, can you hear me? Heather Blau, can you hear me? Corey Malcolm, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Corey. Jerry Lawrence, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Heather, circling back around, can you hear me? Looks like you have audio on my end. Michelle Coldiron, can you hear me? Will Benson, can you hear me? All right, we will try Christopher Benson. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Marlies.
Okay, great.
Okay, Marlise, it's 10 o'clock. Do
Sarah,
you
we can
have
go ahead
many
and start.
more? Go ahead.
We can go ahead
Okay.
and start, and I can do audio checks as people would like to speak when they raise their hand if we have an issue.
Okay. And I see Commissioner Coldiron has her hand raised. Can you try unmuting her now to see if we can do that audio check with Commissioner Coldiron?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Sorry, give me 1 second. Got to scroll through this whole list here to get to under her name.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Commissioner
There we go.
Coldiron, can you hear us?
I have my hand raised.
Oh, perfect. We can hear you. And we see your hand raised.
It's already running, but
Good
I'm not
morning.
hearing anything.
Can you hear? Oh, she can't hear us.
I keep trying. So I'm going
Okay.
here.
Commissioner Coldiron, can you
I'm
hear
going
us?
there. Yeah, I would just.
Okay, Eric, maybe you could reach out to.
He is. I think he's speaking with her on the phone. Basically, yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
All
so yeah,
right.
Sarah, I think we can go ahead
Well,
and start, and I check with people as we go.
fantastic. Thank you. So again, I am grateful to everybody for your patience with us on this. I take full responsibility for not immediately jumping on a new webinar, thinking that there was a great risk that we would have the same problem with the audio. I've never been so happy to see so many little microphones. For those of us on the organizing side of this, we can see all of the names of the people who are on this webinar, and then they have a little microphone next to their name. And strangely, when we started this the first time, most of you did not, which is, I guess, why you could not speak. And so not knowing that that would happen again, if we were to just go ahead with another webinar, we decided to try the conference line. Plan B didn't seem to work. Apparently a number of people had difficulty getting onto that. So Plan C seems to be working better. Thank you, Plan C. I really appreciate everyone's dedication to trying plans B and C, and I think hopefully this will work better. So, and I'm pleased to see that the attendee number is just about what it was when we left the last webinar, only this time we have a little bit better luck with the audio. So thank goodness we didn't lose a lot of people, but just to be thorough, we're going to ask Nicole to once again give a roll call of our advisory council members that are on this new webinar. So Nicole?
Of course, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, here is our current roll call. And again, council members, if I do not call your name, go ahead and put a comment in the chat box. I know some folks are still joining even as we speak. So again, your attendance will be noted on the note sheet, but go ahead and just let me know that you're here if I don't call your name. We have Clint Barris, Christopher Benson, Will Benson, Chris Berg, Dale Bishop, Justin Brulin, Michelle Coldiron, Ben Daughtry, Daniel Dawson, Jessica Dockery, Richie Gomez, Shelley Kruger, Steve Leopold, Jerry Loren, David Nickpiece, Corey Malcolm, Caroline McLaughlin, Lisa Mongilia, Ken Niedermeyer, Ken Rita, Elena Rodriguez, Susie Roebling, Diane Sylvia, Mimi Stafford, Stephen Patton, Karen Thurman, David Vaughn, Joe Weatherby, and from our agency side, I see Ed Barham, Nick Parr, Heather Blau, CJ Sweetman, Lauren Remsburg, Phil Goodman, Joanna Walzak, and Cindy Lewis.
Thank you. We lost an hour. We got a little bit started, and I'm going to ask Beth to recap for those couple of SAC members that were not able to participate in that early conversation. we'll recap what we did and then we'll carry on. We're going to try to find some time savings and see if we can't finish on time at 1 o'clock as was scheduled. That said, we do have an extra hour on this webinar if we need it. I know all of you have plans, you're busy. There's only so much webinaring one can take, especially when it's as bumpy as the start of this one has been. But we do have extra time if we need it to finish up these important conversations. So once again, real quickly, you can raise your hand and we will call on you, unmute you, and you can participate in the discussion for those Sanctuary Advisory Council members and alternates. So with that, Beth, can you bring us forward to where we were when we left off and do a quick recap for those who were unable to participate in that conversation? If any of those folks have something they want to add to what was already covered, we can do that, and then we can keep on keeping on. Thank you, Beth.
Sure, yes. And can you see my screen with the marine zone boundaries slide on it?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so I'll just do a very quick recap of where we were. Started talking through the priority issues that we did not talk through on the March 24th session, and that really kicks us off with some of the specific marine zones that you guys identified as priorities. The first one, and we did complete this conversation, was looking at Key Largo Management Area, status quo here, and preferred alternative, which includes this area as a no anchor zone. The proposal that was put forward for advisory council discussion is that the SAC supports status quo, so essentially making no change to the existing regulations, so not adding a no anchor area in that zone. Very little discussion here. Ben Daughtry primarily just noted that this was something that was supported through most of the public comment we heard, agency, Gulf Council, South Atlantic Council, and the like. So there was very little discussion on this item. This is where we were when we left off, is looking at the Marquesas Turtle Zone. And just real quick recap, alternative one, status quo. There is no marine zone here in the Marquesas region. There is a proposed new marine zone in alternatives 2 and 3 that would be idle speed, no wake, and an alternative 4, idle speed, no wake, and transit only. The intent of this marine zone is to protect internationally important sea turtle foraging habitat. The discussion, so first off, the proposal that was put forward for discussion was that the SAC supports additional protections for sea turtle foraging habitat. However, any specific spatial protections need clear scientific data. The discussion that took place earlier is noted, very high level summary, but noted in red there, and that needing to understand if certain activities that go on in that area are compatible with the goals of this proposed zone. The examples given were various fishing activities, anchoring activities, and clear data and understanding if these activities are impacting the sea turtles and the habitat there. Comments that potentially a more refined area and regulations be applied, the sort of teeing off the proposal that any specific spatial protections need clear scientific data, so refining that. And a note that in this area, there is sometimes transit and in bad weather, and so being aware of the need to transit through this area and safe transit and idle speed, no wake, or transit only could cause challenges there. And then a comment about considering if seasonal application of either a marine zone and or specific regulations to protect the sea turtles during a sensitive season. So those were the comments that I captured based on the discussion that tee off of that proposal that any specific spatial protections need clear scientific data. And with that, open it up for any final comments, discussion, or we can move on if people feel that this adequately captures input at this point.
Thank you, Beth. So if council members, alternates want to offer thoughts, I see Corey Malcolm has his hand raised, Marlies.
Yes, I was about to unmute him. Corey, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit of a historical perspective, I guess. Up until 1971, turtle fishing was allowed down here. It was a business. And at that point, by 1970, there were virtually no green sea turtles here in the Florida Keys. They had been completely fished out. And we've gone from, in that 50-year period, no sea turtles to what was described to us as, one of the largest, I don't know what the term would be, colonies, rookeries, I don't know, of green sea turtles anywhere in the world. I'm just not seeing a problem. I mean, if somebody can demonstrate that there's an issue there, that would be great. But otherwise, it seems like the real problem was solved 50 years ago by outlawing turtle fishing. That's
Thank you,
all I
Corey.
have.
Interesting. Thank you.
Corey.
Any
Sarah, I
other?
don't see any other
Go
hands
ahead.
raised. Oh, Mimi Stafford just raised her hand. I'm just going to unmute Mimi. Go ahead, Mimi.
I was just going to tag on to that. I used to be down here in the 60s, 1960s, when I first visited, and it was a rare event to see a turtle, where now every time I go out, I see a lot. So I think I agree with Corey. It's been a success story. The turtles have had a significant comeback. And though I think it's appropriate to continue to protect them, we want to do it in a way that is reasonable and gives some common sense reactions to the circumstances. So thank you, Corey, for your remarks.
And thank you, Mimi. Chris Berg, I see Chris's hand is raised. Marlies, can you unmute him?
I'm unmuting Chris. Yep. There you go, Chris. You're unmuted.
Yeah, I would just echo that observation. The turtles are coming back quite strongly. That's wonderful. The evidence that this is a particular hotspot, an aggregation for feeding turtles is pretty clear. The evidence that boats cautious about not running down turtles, which unfortunately does happen. I don't know about in that area, but obviously it happens. We find them washed up on the beach with prop scars and boat strikes on them. So short of regulation, just further study and further education about that area could go a long way to prevent it from ever becoming a problem.
Thank you, Chris. It looks
Thank
like
you.
Dave
I see
Vaughn
Dave.
has his hand up, unless he's got the helium hand again.
Okay, I'm going to unmute you, Dave Vaughn. You're unmuted.
Yeah, sorry. Must be something with my computer and the go to webinar. It just keeps turning back on. So disregard my hand waving unless you see me type a question.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Chris, this is Beth, and I just, I kind of lost your comments a little bit there. Did I capture the intent of your comments well enough by that last statement?
Beth, it looks like we might have lost Chris. It's listing him as offline now, so he may have had a connectivity challenge.
Okay.
I will let you know when he pops back on.
Okay.
We can also invite him to send through the chat or comment text to suggest. So we can follow up with Chris on that. All right, any other comments, questions on this particular proposed motion? I don't see any hands raised. And so unless somebody's hand pops up, I would suggest we move to the next topic of discussion, Beth, which is deep reef expansion.
Yes, so the next priority, and in our February meeting, a few specific marine zones were identified, particularly Cary Fort and Alligator Reef. But this slide here shows 3 areas where existing marine zones, Cary Fort, Alligator Reef, and Western Sambo, in status quo. This is status quo overlaid with the preferred alternative, shows an extension of all these 3 zones to capture some of the more offshore deep reef habitat, and that is included in the preferred alternative. And for this proposal, for this concept, the proposal for Advisory Council discussion and consideration is that the SAC supports the extension of existing spas to encompass deep reef, no anchoring in the entire zone, including the new expansion area, and no trap fishing in the entire zone. However, vessels should be allowed to operate at normal speed except among the mooring buoys of the highly dived shallow reef areas where idle speed is prudent. Fishing should be allowed in the expansion area. So this is a proposal put forward for discussion, consideration. I'll just put the image back up. So it's this area that is being proposed for expansion and some additional protections, regulations, and based on this proposal, some exceptions.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, so we have a draft proposed motion for consideration here. And so we invite council members and alternates to offer their comments or questions by raising your hand. I see a hand has gone up, but before I ask Marlise to unmute you, Richie, I'm just going to note for those who are participating in this webinar as members of the public, we thank you for being with us. If you have comments, you can send them by email, and we will make them available to the Sanctuary Advisory Council members. And that email address is floridakeys@noaa.gov. So if members of the public want to make a comment during this, that's the way to do so, is by sending an email. Again, that's floridakeys, one word, @noaa.gov. So with that, I will see if Marlise would be willing to unmute Richie so he can offer some comments on this one.
Richie, you're unmuted. Can you hear us, Richie?
We're not hearing you if
Richie,
you're speaking, Richie, I'm not sure.
Okay, Richie, I'm going to chat you to troubleshoot. In the meantime, Sarah, I see Dave Vaughn has his hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Dave.
Is that in the helium hand again, or is that a real hand? Because Ken has his hand up too.
I'll unmute Ken and I'll check with Dave. Thank you. Ken Niedermeyer.
Okay, yep.
Ken Niedermeyer,
Yeah,
you're muted.
Okay, I'm not sure why we would expand the area, but then allow fishing in there. And then I think it would also be very difficult. You'd have to mark it twice. You'd have to mark the area that you could fish and then the area that you can't fish. I just think if we're going to expand it to cover the deep reef habitat, we should also prohibit fishing. Is my quick comment.
Thanks, Ken. Ken Rita, I see Ken has his hand muted. I mean, his hand raised. Ken, you're unmuted.
Yes, thank you. Have we established the true depth of what we're calling, or what we're looking for as far as deep reef? So how far out is that go? Is it 120 feet? Is it 150 feet, 100 feet, 80 feet? It's kind of a mystery as far as where that really falls.
The offshore deep reefs, generally, these are proposed to go to the 90-foot contour.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Beth. I see Steve Leopold has his hand raised.
Steve, you're muted.
It's
Okay.
there we go.
Okay, yeah, again, pushed the wrong
Hi.
button. But yeah, I didn't push
Sorry.
my finger on my hand here initially because it does include fishing, but then that Ken brought it up about, and he's absolutely right. How would you ever mark this area to exclude fishing? And so I think this needs a lot of discussion here, and I think all of these should be separated because they're all individual areas with different needs and different bottom structure. I know firsthand that Alligator Reef offshore is a lot of sand, and maybe this extension could be put at a different area that has good coral structure, but more so in the deeper areas than Alligator Reef. So I would like to see this discussed in detail and separately. And what else? And Ken, and also Beth, the extension at Alligator Reef is well beyond 90 feet. So you may want to check up on that. So, and also the boundaries need to be defined more specifically, and not just us putting a cursor on the interactive maps. I think you need to put numbers down. And I think I brought this up way back that I'd like to see exact numbers presented by the map people, and not just where we put a cursor on it, but so we can follow out exactly how deep it is over there. And I also do think if this was a non-fishing extension, you're kind of putting a notch in the middle of a migratory pattern of fish. So I see a lot of different sides to this, and like I say, at some point, I'd like to know at what point we would have a discussion about these extensions individually.
Thank you, Steve. And I will say that in the next version, when we come out with the next proposal, it will have those detailed coordinates included. So you can look forward to that.
Okay, and they'll be in the format that we can use on our GPS. It's not the Google Earth format, or I'm not quite sure what it's called. But
yep.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Well, that would be great. And I hope everybody understands what I'm saying about making a notch offshore of where we a lot of us don't anchor there, but we fish for pelagics. But and again, to say again that that this is a problem, that you're putting extending an area from a no fishing area to a fishing area. There's a lot of buoys out there, and the extension just interferes with our regular fishing practices, certainly off Alligator Reef and carries forward. And I may hopefully Richie was commenting on Western Sambo. I am not very familiar with that area, and like I've said all along, my representation of the fisheries charter fishermen in Key West is very limited. So I'd like to hear, if we can, hear what Richie says about that area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and try to unmute Richie again.
Sure.
Richie, can you hear me?
Yeah, do you hear me now, Beth?
Yes.
We do.
We do.
Okay, this has been frustrating. Even when we went to the other format, then I couldn't see the map. I could just hear voices. So I'm not even sure exactly where we're at, except that I am able to read the screen right now. I'm kind of lost I know we were discussing Marquesas and I had comments about that, but just reading the screen that I see now, you know, there is one other reason why we would anchor in a no anchor zone. And when you encompass a huge area, like I think we're talking about Western Sambos as one of the areas, when you're talking about such a large area, the other main reason that we would anchor besides fishing or diving would be because we broke down or some other difficulty that has warranted us anchoring because of some difficulty on the vessel. Besides that, I'm against, you know, a lot of the stuff going on in the Western Sambo area, but I really have been lost up to this moment, so I don't even know how else to comment at this time. That's it.
Yeah, I apologize for the frustrations. I'm not quite sure what was going on with all the technology, but I'm glad you're with us now and can offer your comments, and hopefully technology will be good to us for the next couple of hours so people can continue to participate. Marlise, I see that Karen Thurman's hand appears to be up.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Karen. Karen, you're unmuted.
The guys touched on everything I was going to say or my questions. Just one quick comment that Ken touched on briefly, and this is in general, not specific to this one thing, but overall, constituents kept calling in and commenting on the fact that there's too many zones and too many changes in really small condensed areas. It's going to be hard to educate people, and it's going to be hard to enforce. And that's it.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, any other comments, hands raised, folks that want to offer any other thoughts on this expansion to deep reef habitats for these sanctuary preservation areas?
Sarah, it looks like both Rita and Steve Leopold have hands up again. I'm going to go ahead and unmute them and see if they have additional comments. Rita, you're unmuted.
Just to be clear, though, we will look at these as individually warranted areas, correct?
Yeah, I mean, yes, each of these zones is considered separately. We've lumped them in this conversation only because they are similar in terms of what we're trying to achieve, but that doesn't mean that all have to have the exact same conclusions drawn at the end of the day. Does that answer your question, Ken?
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I see Steve Leopold. I'm going to unmute you. You're unmuted.
Okay. Hey, I was looking on my interactive map here, and just roughly the northeastern boundary of the extension at Alligator Reef is out and about 140 feet from the best I can tell. So quite a bit outside of 90, and that again, that's right in the middle of a migratory pattern that we fish. So we'll be taking away a big chunk of fishing area that is mostly by by trolling, by fishing on the surface and non-anchoring. And then what's this little heart down here that keeps flashing? I'm not quite sure what that is on my screen.
I'm not sure either. I don't see it on our screen, so.
Okay.
No, I don't know.
Mystery.
Okay. A mystery on your end.
All right. Good deal.
All right.
I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you. Marlise, I see that Susie Roebling has her hand raised.
Okay, I'm going to, oh, I do not, oh, there she is. Okay, Susie, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Good. Yeah, I had the phone because the computer wasn't working. So good morning, everybody. I had a couple of questions. I remember back when there was talk about extending the boundary, it was the purpose of the expansion is that to encompass the deep reefs, and that is because of the habitat used by the fish, that there were certain areas, maybe perhaps in some of our existing spas, that had not completed the area that reef fishes use, as well as then there being some issues with boats coming a little close to trying to pull those fish out there from people diving and whatnot. So, and also you have that you're kind of allowing trolling basically, rather than, so it's a little confusing to me, like Ken Niedermeyer stated, why are we expanding this and then allowing fishing in there? It's strange. It's like it was for certain areas of, I'm not sure how wide. I was trying to look at that. You know, maybe they're extending too far in some cases if they're over the 90 foot for people trolling the fish movement out there. But how big of an area, for example, like at Alligator, how wide is that where somebody may have to nudge out a bit and to say perhaps to allow those groupers, whatever, to get out there and where they go possibly to spawn and at carry sport. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Susie. I see we have Chris Berg's hand is raised and Cindy Lewis. And then we hopefully can.
Sarah, Mimi Stafford also
ahead.
would like to comment, but her hand just went up. So I'll go through those three
Okay.
folks that you just noted.
Great, thanks.
Chris Berg, you're unmuted.
Hey, everybody. Sorry I lost about the first half of this conversation somehow, but technologically speaking. But so it's to answer Susie's question or to expand upon it, it wasn't just fish populations that this was aimed at, but the deeper corals. So, you know, there's some evidence that some of these deeper corals are not immune, but, you know, somewhat less affected by the stony coral tissue loss disease, by coral bleaching, which, you know, is affected by heat and light. So I put this draft proposal that we're looking at together. My sense was that given where we're at, the corals are more important than the fish, and that getting, you know, a limit or a prohibition on anchoring, except in emergencies. I think to Richie's point about emergency anchoring, I don't think anybody's going to fault anybody for emergencies, but you know, keeping anchors off of those corals and keeping traps off those corals would do a world of good for them. And I think the hook and line fishing is, I wouldn't go so far as to say it has no impact on those corals, but I would say it's minimal.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Mimi Stafford.
Okay, and then
Mimi,
Cindy
you're
Lewis.
unmuted.
Okay,
You're
it seems
self-muted
like,
on your end.
am I? So,
Oh, we can hear you now.
Nope, we can hear you.
or now?
Go ahead, Mimi. We
It
can hear
seems
you.
that my icons are opposite what they should be. An interesting meeting. Anyway, I had agreed with Ken and I'd agreed with Steve, but my question is, when this topic first was under discussion, my understanding was that there was concern about the spawning aggregations and that these deeper reefs were important areas. So it seems odd to me to include lobster prohibition on the lobster fishing, even though I understand that from an impact to the coral, but to allow hook and line, it seems like the reverse of what the original intent was.
Thanks, Mimi.
You're welcome.
All right. Marlise, I think
Okay, I'm gonna
Cindy
unmute
Lewis
Cindy
was, yep, thanks.
Cindy, you're unmuted.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Chris actually said quite a bit of what I wanted to make a point about, that these deep coral reefs are an important source for, at some point, hopefully replenishing our reefs, or just one more source of it. But protecting the corals from anchor damage obviously is very important. But any sort of extractive measures are going to tip the balance of the entire reef ecosystem, not just the corals, but everything on that reef. So if these are supposed to be marine protected areas that we're proposing to expand, and I agree, each section needs to be, each spa needs to be looked at individually, because some of these go down to the sand in 80 feet and some of them go down to the sand in 90 feet. And so that boundary of where the coral stops could be the extent of the boundary, and to further protect these reefs. And I think it's really important to consider the whole protection from an ecosystem, especially of these corals, but the entire ecosystem. So non-extractive practices in these proposed extended areas are really important to protect the entire ecosystem. And there are several other spas besides the couple that were mentioned here that could be or are being considered moving them out to the edge of the reef system, which is usually in 80, 90 feet of water, not out to 150 feet.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate it. Okay, Ken Rita has his hand up again. See if he had additional comments. Ken, you're off mute.
Well, thank you, but it must be a helium hand. I did not raise intentionally.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Thank you. What about you, Steve? I see your hand is up again. I don't know if that had anything to do with the mysterious heart on your screen. You're off mute, Steve.
Thank you. No, I figured that out. Just as far as spawning aggregations off of, I was a little surprised at the last conversation about identifying a certain species in a spawning aggregation. So if there is a spawning aggregation, that it should be told what species and where these aggregating spas of fish are, or aggregating schools of fish are. So just want to be aware of that, because I'm not aware of anything outside of Alligator Reef, and I hate to have it put out there that there is an aggregating school of fish when they're really not there. And it's kind of getting put out here that is maybe why you want to protect this. But if it is the case, please let us know which spa and what kind of fish. So just let us know, and that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, I don't see any more hands, and in the interest of time, and I'm going to try to keep us moving so that we can end as close to that 1 o'clock target that we have as possible. So I suggest we move on to the next topic, which I think we're going to need a good amount of time for, which is the Tortuga South proposal. So Beth, if you can introduce that for us.
I can. So the next, I think, 4 slides are focused on the advisory council goals for this management plan review process to look at and consider large contiguous habitats to be protected in a marine zone in the sanctuary. And so the first section of slides is specific to Tortuga South, and then another set of slides looks more broadly at the large contiguous areas that are proposed throughout the Florida Keys. So this one specific to Tortugas Ecological Reserve South, here status quo. Alternative 3 does extend that boundary to the west by 1 mile, and that is shown here in the last panel. Alternative 1, status quo, is in red, and alternative 3, preferred alternative, that extends that westward by 1 mile to capture a little extra area that has been shown to support fish spawning, aggregation activity, and habitat, is the extension there. So
The proposal that was put forward for discussion is that the SAC supports this western expansion and recommends that the southern boundary be moved north to allow fishing in the deep waters remote from Riley's Hump and documented spawning aggregation. I'll just go back to this slide. So proposed for discussion is this westward extension, but also the proposal to potentially remove some of the southern area from the marine zone. That is not depicted here because it's not a proposal in the restoration blueprint. So that is what was put forward for consideration discussion at this point.
I'll just add, Beth, that that last sentence in the proposal says it's essential that the sanctuary demonstrate that it's capable of removing as well as creating regulatory restrictions on fishing. So with that, I invite any council members who would like to offer comments on this section. I see Chris Berg has his hand raised, and he was on the core group, so may have some clarifying comments here. Chris, you're unmuted.
Thanks. Yes, I was on the core group and I put this language together. This language reflects the consensus statement of the Ecosystem Protection Working Group, which met in 2014 and 2015 about, all of the protected areas, new and potential new and whatnot. And, consensus in that group meant that at least 75% of the members were okay with this or enthusiastic about it. I don't remember exactly how that vote landed, but there were people on that working group that were, opposing most new regulations. Many things did not reach consensus. However, this did. And, I understand that the documented additional spawning populations that are west of the existing boundary are worth protecting. But in asking about what was going on in the deeper southern end of that protected area, I never found written or got any sort of, compelling verbal indication of what it was that was out there that was being protected. So I do think that, lopping off some of the bottom area is not going to do any harm. And I do believe it would be a great opportunity for the sanctuary to demonstrate that it can reduce restriction as well as create it.
Thank you for that clarification, Chris. I appreciate it. I see that Ben Daughtry raised his hand to comment on this, and Ben, you are unmuted.
Hey guys, thank you. So I do recall, I don't know if John Hunt is with us today, but I recall when we talked about what resources were out there, I feel like he had an answer to that. I'm not quite sure what it was, but I mean, I'm in agreement with Chris. The other overall question I have, and you guys may have, I didn't get to participate in the last meeting, so how important is it from what we're talking about today and what the SAC wants to recommend versus what the staff is dealing with our partners at both fisheries and FWC? How important is what they're contributing going to be on this impact, and does or should the SAC be taking what they said into consideration about these kind of things? Because once again, I don't want to spend a bunch of our time if our state partners and our fisheries partners have said that they don't want to see some of this stuff. Do we need to be in a thorough discussion about it? Should the SAC just go ahead and make their recommendations and disregard what has been put out there from the fisheries and from FWC? I'd like some input about that.
Sure, good question, Ben. So John is not able to be with us today. I will let other FWC folks that are on the line raise their hands if they have something to add in terms of answering the question of what is or is not there to be protected should that boundary change in the south. What I will say with regard to input from FWC and for that matter DEP, both of those agencies are putting together their comments. They have not yet submitted them to us. I would not, when you said disregard, I think you used the word disregard what they're saying. It's my personal opinion that the council can provide us with your comments independent of what the FWC is providing. For that matter, there are FWC folks and DEP on this webinar. They may be taking into consideration your comments as they finalize theirs. Either way, all of it will be seen by us as input that we need to consider. So from my perspective, the timing of which one comes first is a chicken and an egg question. And to me, it's less important to know whose came first and whose took into account which. I just want to hear, what does FWC think about this? What do the Sanctuary Advisory Council members and their constituents think about this? And we'll pull all of that together to move forward with a proposal. Does that answer your question, Ben?
Yes, I think that helps. This basically, if I can put words in your mouth, we should move forward and do what we feel that we need to do with our constituents based on that.
I'm fine with. Yep,
and
those words can come out of my mouth.
And then I believe Justin Brulin has had to leave this most recent meeting that we're on now. And while I don't know the detail, I do recall that this corridor area that we're talking about was a significant part of reef area for hook and line fishermen out there. I'm not sure if there's also lobster fishing that happens out in that area. It would not surprise me if that were the case. So from an impact there, I recall hearing that it was somewhere near 50% of the hard bottom that had been left out there. And once again, I wish John Hunt was here because I would like to hear his input on whether there's a consideration and a need for having that corridor area. And I'm certainly against having this giant slow idle speed zone. I think those are obviously overreaches and maybe overlooks of what needs to happen in these big areas offshore.
I'm not going to put words in the mouth of the FWC folks, but what I will say is that they have been actively participating in these discussions, listening to the public comment periods, attending all of them, reviewing the public input, having their own conversations with constituents on this, and I believe are absolutely taking into consideration those types of comments and concerns, both here in Tortuga South, but then I also heard you mentioning the corridor, which is a separate proposal. I know that they are taking the feedback from constituents into what they are preparing as their formal comments into this. Again, I'm not making any statement about what position they may come down on, but I know that they are actively considering the concerns that have been raised to date.
And this is
okay,
Beth.
let's see, are there any other?
I was just going to note that for the question about value and habitat information for the southern area of Tortuga South, I can't pull it up and refer to it right now, but for those of you, I can share the Tortuga's environmental impact statement from 2002 that at that time is a good starting point for some of the habitat status and what is there and what was intended for protection through Tortuga's Ecological Reserve South at that time.
Thanks, Beth. Marlise, I see that Karen Thurman's hand has been raised.
Okay, I'll unmute Karen. Karen, you're
unmuted, Karen.
I believe Ben is correct, and there is significant lobstering going on in the area. And several people have spoken at the meetings about the hard bottom there and where they were dropping their traps currently, and it allowed them to better avoid the coral in the areas that needed protecting. And I think we can find that actual diagram that Mr. Disson from Key West had done. I'll find that and send it to Beth again. It made sense.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any other hands that are not helium hands? Oh,
I think
go
Richie
ahead.
Gomez has his hand up. I'm going to try to unmute Richie. Richie, can you hear us?
Yeah, do you hear me?
We do.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so, listening to Chris and knowing that he's going with information from 2014, it just continues to point out the part of the problem with that whole area and what you're trying to do. And I'll say it one more time. I know we're trying to speed up this meeting. There is just a small group of fishermen out there, and if you could sit down with them in a room, I bet in a certain period of time, you guys would be able to find a medium ground, a common ground where everyone could live with. And as it is right now, these fishermen are not having enough input with these proposed closures that are going to affect them tremendously. And there is hard bottom. There is a lot of fishing going on in the proposed closed areas, and they are very important to them. And for them not to be able to be a bigger part of this discussion is it's not justifiable. I mean, this is not a huge group of fishermen. They should have more input here. That's it.
Thank you, Richie. And we have, during the public comment period, we did sit down with a number of them and listen to their concerns and have absolutely heard from them. I can't say that I've heard from 100% of all fishermen, but we definitely have made every effort to be available to listen. So of course, now that the public comment is officially closed, if I were to do such a meeting, that probably would be considered, but we have been working very hard to get lots of input. So I appreciate that.
Well,
Sorry, Richie. Go ahead again.
yeah. I mean, to get the kind of input that I know you got at that meeting, because I'm in close contact with some of the people that were there, and then just to move forward with the same game plan. Again, it's not justifiable, but that's all I have to say for the moment.
Thank you. Okay, well,
Sarah, Mimi,
yeah.
Mimi Stafford would like to speak, but is having the opposite of helium hand. So let me get down to her. I will unmute her. Mimi, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, my hands have been amputated. I have no hands.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh.
No, it's funny. Anyway, I appreciate Karen's comments and Richie's as well, that I know you don't want to keep having little special side meetings, but there are fishermen who will be greatly impacted, and they, in order to get some collaboration with people, we really do need to take into account the problems that we're creating with all these different closures. So I agree that, there are a lot of lobster fishermen that will be harmed by that. So thank you. I'll just keep texting in wildly.
Thank you. Sorry about that. And to your point, both of you, Richie and Mimi, what I want to assure actually everyone is that as we put out the next version, I think you will see that we have been listening. Of course, we can't make every single change that every single person will think is 100% what they want, but I feel very confident that when the next version comes out, people will see that it reflects the input from this community and that things have been adapted, adjusted according to the concerns and input that we are hearing. So, so I will stop with that, see if there's anybody else who wants to make any specific comments. It doesn't look like we have any more hands up on this topic, so I suggest that we move on, Beth, to large contiguous areas.
Sarah,
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Coldiron has her hand raised. I'm going to see if she would like to speak.
Excellent. Good morning, Commissioner Coldiron.
Hello and good morning. I hope you all can hear me all right. Thank you all,
Loud and
everyone
clear.
who's here, and the patience. Goodness, in this pandemic, we are getting hit right and left with the ability to be flexible, and this meeting is a perfect example of how we're having to do that. So thank you, Sarah and staff. And I just wanted to echo what Mimi just said, and Richie, that I just think it's so important that we take into consideration the feedback that we receive from the fishermen, just to ensure that we don't have unnecessary, unintended consequences for some of these decisions we make. And I am happy, Sarah, to hear you say that, and what we're going to see next will reflect that the feedback has been reviewed, and you've taken that into consideration. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you to you and the rest of our county leadership and community leadership for all of the work you're doing on behalf of this this community. I know that the decisions you all are facing are extraordinarily difficult, and I, for one, and I suspect everyone on this phone call, is very, very grateful to you for your leadership and the support that you're giving all of us. So I'll just take this opportunity to say that. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you.
I do not see any other comments or hands raised. So with that then, Beth.
Okay, so I feel a little bit that some of the comments on the previous slide were referring to at least one of the proposals of large contiguous areas. So this slide here shows the whole range of large contiguous area proposals that are included in the draft restoration blueprint. And one is proposed in each region. In the Upper Keys, Carey's Fort is the area that is proposed for shoreline to deep reef protection, only included in the most environmentally protective alternative 4. In the Middle Keys, Long Key Tennessee Reef is included as a sanctuary preservation area in alternative 3, and a conservation area, transit only, in alternative 4, shoreline to deep reef in both cases. Western Sambo, in existing marine zone in alternative 3, is included as a sanctuary preservation area, and if you recall, is extended to include the deep reef area. And then finally, Tortugas Corridor, which I think some of the previous comments were in reference to this area, that is proposed as a new marine zone connecting Tortugas National Park to Tortugas Ecological Reserve South as a sanctuary. So these are the proposals for protecting large contiguous areas in each region of the Florida Keys. Again, these are proposals at this stage, and at this time, there was no draft proposal or motion submitted specific to these areas for consideration. So I think open for any additional comments, considerations that were not shared on the previous discussion for advisory council members, we open the floor.
And in interest of a question that was raised previously when we kind of lumped a number of proposals relative to the deep reef expansion, these will be considered individually. We've merely lumped them for the purposes of this conversation because they are similar in terms of what is trying to be accomplished, but they are not necessarily all having to be addressed the same way, if that makes sense. So in other words, while we have put them out for a conversation together, they are individual actions that will be considered separately. So with that, I invite any core group members that want to clarify any thoughts they might have had, or council members or alternates with comments or questions. I see that Dave Makepeace has his hand raised, and you are unmuted.
Good morning. Are we gonna consider all of these areas as in one comment, or are we going to discuss each of them individually?
That is open for your determination. If you have specific comments on a specific one, feel free. Or if you have some comment that addresses all four, that's fine too.
All right, well, I'll start with Carysfort. I happen to believe that we missed an opportunity by not declaring alternative 4 as the preferred alternative, because I think it would have driven the discussion a little more aggressively as to whether there are conflicting activities like lobstering, et cetera, in that area. I know there were comments, but when you provide a less restrictive alternative, you don't tend to drive the discussion of what I think should be the preferred alternative, and this is just my opinion. But everything we've learned says these large areas are critical to the sanctuary, and to not have one from Long Key to Biscayne National Park, I think is a hole in our plan. So I feel strongly that we need to have the Carysfort area, the larger alternative 4. I'm assuming that there's going to be transit at least through the Hawks Channel in all of these large areas. But I think maybe we could drive the discussion a little more aggressively as to whether there are conflicts that might need activities that might not be intrusive and should be allowed, as we've discussed in some of the possible trolling in the deeper areas. And secondly, there's been a lot of discussion that the Long Key, Tennessee large area may not be capturing the best habitat. And if we've got somebody that's more informed as to that issue, because I've heard it, but it's only hearsay, I'd love to hear about that, about whether that is in fact the best habitat for a large contiguous area. So those are my comments.
Thank you, sir. Not sure if anyone is going to be able to answer that last part of your comment with regard to the best habitat. I know that that's a discussion FWC has also been having with some constituents. But I see that Ken Niedermeyer has raised his hand. Marlise, would you be willing to unmute him? You are unmuted, Mr. Niedermeyer.
All right, so I agree with David on the Carysfort in particular. And I've brought up several times in public comment and even, boy, several years ago, discussions with other people, John Armour in particular, about, some in Carysfort in particular, this comment is, maybe we don't do a complete closure. So maybe you have corridors where the kids even brought this up, and the David, met with the kids at school. So so you have a trapping corridors where you have a narrow corridor that runs through there for the trappers. Maybe you have a catch and release inshore. So I think our alternative is if you try to go for a complete closure at Carysfort, you're going to run up against the ocean reef community. You're going to run up against a lot of different people that are going to shoot it down. But if you adopt a more flexible type of closure, we could maybe dial back the activity in that area just a little bit and keep it from expanding, but still allow traditional fishermen to use the area, some sort of limited fishing activity in that area. I think you could eliminate a lot of your opposition by doing that, and you could actually achieve part of what we've set out to do, which is to establish some of these large contiguous areas. And I think the Long Key one could be done that way too. I mean, there's, you know, in a perfect world, yeah, you'd close the whole thing, but that's not a perfect world for the fishermen. So, you know, is there a compromise? Is there a way that we can partially close it and, you know, make some headway, but maybe not achieve our ultimate goals? Just my thoughts on that. I think, you know, it's not it doesn't have to be an all or nothing.
Thank you. That's true. I see that Carolyn McLaughlin has her hand raised. Marlise, if you could unmute her. Carolyn?
Hi, yeah, thanks. I want to echo some of the comments previously made by Dave and Ken. I agree with Ken's kind of thought about the need to be flexible, and I wonder if it's possible, considering some of these proposals and others, I don't know if it's possible to have some kind of adaptive management system in place. I know there's, you know, constraints in terms of NEPA and this, you know, policy-making process that we're going through, but, you know, I do wonder if when we're looking at some of these closures and some of these kind of larger protected areas, if there's a way to, you know, implement like a 5-year monitoring plan and there's a reassessment every 5 years or so at some of these areas. I know that that kind of strategy was implemented jointly between the National Park Service and the FWC when they're looking at the management of the Marine Reserve and Dry Tortugas National Park. And so I wonder if that may alleviate some of the stress that comes with the fact that, okay, if we implement these marine protected areas are going to be closed forever. Instead, it's like, okay, well, let's see if we can protect some of these areas that research supports perhaps need to be closed. And if it's not working, then we can shift and look at other areas. And I think that that kind of adaptive management approach may make more stakeholders more comfortable with some of these marine reserve areas and some of these other marine protected areas. And so I definitely agree that, especially with what Dave said about the need to protect large contiguous areas throughout the sanctuary in different regions of the sanctuary, but again, could be flexible to the needs of different stakeholders and open to reconfiguring some of these boundaries depending on where critical habitat is located or where constituents may be open to kind of shifting or changing some of these boundaries. I also wanted to put a specific plug in for the Tortugas corridor. I think we all know how special the Dry Tortugas region is. And looking specifically at the performance of the existing marine reserves in the Tortugas region in both the sanctuary and the national park, you've seen benefits not only in Tortugas area, but literally along both of Florida's coasts. And these areas have been effective at reseeding fish populations in a very, very large geographic area. And so, of course, we can't be certain of what the effect of implementing the Tortugas corridor would be, but there is data that suggests that this is a known fish spawning corridor, and we know that it would be connecting important spawning corridors that exist already and that are already protected. I know that there's also been economic surveys done of the implementation of the existing marine reserves in this area, and they've found that there have not had any negative economic impacts. And so I would just encourage the SAC and others to really look closely at the Tortugas corridor, because I think it would provide a number of benefits, not only in that region, but really throughout the reef tract.
Thank you. Thank you for that input, Carolyn. Okay, we've got a number of other hands up. Stefan Patton. Marlise, if you can unmute, you're unmuted, Stefan.
Thank you. I'm just want to know that I agree 100% with what's been said up to this point. The contiguous areas are so important to so many different aspects of the ecosystem that we just need to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater of saying, let's have them, and if we have to do some modifications, great, but we need these large areas protected as protected as we can get them. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. All right, I see Mimi, Richie, and Cindy all want to comment. So let's go with Mimi. Marlise.
Scrolling down to Mimi.
Thank you. You are self-muted, Mimi, it says maybe. Oh, there we go. Whoops.
Am I unmuted
there we
now?
Go. We can hear you. Gotcha.
Okay. I've had agreed with Ken about some adaptive things helping concept for this to be more palatable to people. But I also want to make a specific comment, as I have done already, about the Western Sambo area that is scheduled for idle speed only. I can't tell if the actual area has been adapted, but where the original lines were drawn, it would actually put people, if they wanted to run, which you would want to do if you wanted to cover that area in less than 2 hours, you would have to go out over the coral heads, which would be counterproductive. And people basically won't comply in rough weather. You put them right out into a navigational hazard area. So I thought that should be considered, and if it hasn't been addressed, it should be looked at.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, we've got Richie, and then Cindy Lewis, and then Chris Berg. Marlies, if you can unmute Richie, please.
Richie, you're unmuted. Richie, you're unmuted.
We're not hearing you if you're speaking, Richie. Let me give you another minute. There we are.
There you are.
Hello. Hi.
I keep having to put it on my earplugs and then take it off. That was happening the last time too. I hope you didn't hear
Trust
me
me, I
cursing.
know this stuff is crazy. No, if we did, it's okay.
Okay.
We can take it.
Anyway, so Sarah, just really thank you again, because you keep emphasizing that there is going to be a new draft proposal and you're going to be taking all these things into consideration. So I can't wait to see it. And Ken, thank you for remembering that fishermen are important too. And we do need to eliminate opposition, and there is compromise. But one of the things, and I hope you're listening well, Sarah and the rest of you, because I keep emphasizing, because we are getting down to the wire. One of the main points of opposition for all fishermen is that you want to take these large areas, but then the people that we feel are doing more damage aren't even spoken about. I mean, here's large areas that you want to take from us, but yet divers can still go there. So if we're going to ever get to a compromising position with fishermen, sanctuary, and the diving population, I mean, to continue to ignore that in every single meeting is so frustrating to me as a fisherman for all these years, understanding how unfair my situation has been when it comes to me versus a diver. I am always the one singled out as I look at hundreds of divers and snorkelers on reefs every day, and I say, what is it that protects them while eliminating me? So if we're ever going to get to a position where we can feel like we've gotten a fair shake, we certainly have to one day realize that fishermen are as important as divers, and we don't want to take their livelihood from them, but we in turn don't want it taken from us. And I hope that gets to you, and I hope we see that in the next draft proposal, because I am waiting to see where we're at the end of this.
Richie, loud and clear. And I have heard that at numerous public meetings as well, the same question raised is, so I assure you that has been heard. Thank you, though.
Thank you.
Okay, Cindy Lewis has been waiting patiently. Can we unmute Cindy? Cindy, you are unmuted, my dear.
Thank you, Sarah. I would like to echo a lot of the comments that have been said before, Ken and others, about the perhaps some flexibility to these large contiguous habitats as far as their usage and closures, including the idle speed issues need to be addressed, particularly as you're transiting the Hawks Channel and these large areas. And I agree also with the adaptive management idea. There's a lot that needs to be looked at with all of these. I specifically wanted to talk to the Long Key area, the question about perhaps this is not the best habitat for an area in the Middle Keys. Perhaps there's no best habitat anywhere in the Middle Keys, but it is a very unique location because of its immediate proximity to the Channel 5 bridge and this opportunity for connectivity with Florida Bay, with the influx of water coming in and out, and with that water, all of the organisms that use Florida Bay for perhaps nursery habitat and then migrate out to the reef, and having the ability to protect this area a little more, with given the flexibility and some adaptive management here. But to protect this area, these contiguous habitats, is important for multiple species, and perhaps for the health actually of this entire area. You know, that is the uniqueness of this area. And Long Key is a very low population density that we enjoy there. A large portion of Long Key is the Long Key State Park, and therefore there is a uninhabited large area, uninhabited beaches and stuff that the turtles use for nesting. There's grass beds there, and certainly a lot of the bonefish and tarpon fishermen know that these flats are very, very important for you know, their occupation. And these are non-extractive habitat activities that these areas are used, but they're all utilized. So this is a very unique area where we've got this influx of bay water. So we've got the connectivity with the bay habitats. We've got this shoreline to reef edge, you know, out in the 90-foot depth area, to protect all of these habitats as one goes to the next, And there aren't a lot of patch reefs or discrete patch reefs, but there are patch reef areas in the fore reef area. And this is just a unique area. It may not be the best habitat to protect, but it's an important habitat that could move forward with some interesting science to go behind it in the idea of the adaptive management to see if this can work, if this can help. It's a very degraded habitat. So I don't know if that helps answer that question or not.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Appreciate that input. I think Chris Berg was next, and then I am noting that Ken Rita also would like to speak. So Chris, we will get you unmuted. You are unmuted, sir.
Thank you, and I won't repeat a lot of what I've just heard. I agree these are important opportunities to you know, manage this habitat and the species in it for their protection, for our bigger picture benefit. That is, if we will give them a break in these few areas, we should all benefit outside of those areas. I also agree that, you know, this notion of adaptive management and greater, you know, stakeholder engagement in figuring out what may work is right. But boy, we are an awful long way into this process, and I don't know what more we do other than have the sanctuary release the next draft, and we all comment on it. And if they got it right, great. And if they didn't, then what? We could go around and around about this for a long time. But I just wanted to say something about, you know, Richie made a really good argument for, you know, equity among user groups, and I've heard that argument. I appreciate it. I just also want this group to be thinking about equity among regions of the Keys when we look at the fact that the Western Sambo Reserve already exists and has existed for a long time, although as noted, everything is allowed in there except for fishing. I guess my plug is this: whatever we come up with for these other areas, we should then also try to make Western Sambo similar to those. If we're going to get into adaptive management for those, we should get into adaptive management for the Sambos Reserve. If we're going to limit all users in those, we should limit all users, including diving in the Western Sambos area, so that we've got equity among the regions of the Keys when it comes to these large and naturally controversial zones. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Ken Rita, I understand you had some comments you wanted to offer to this discussion. You are off mute.
Thank you. Thank you. To the point earlier that Ken made, the need for flexibility in a corridor is going to be extremely important to the community most affected in the Carey's Fort area with this proposal. I would also submit that certainly, you know, we could get buy-in as it is closer to the actual reef area, but for purposes of dead smack in the middle of Hawks Channel, with the amount of boat traffic that relies on that corridor up and down on the north end of the Keys here, and the size vessels that at that point come through there, you could conceivably do as much, I would maybe not damage, but you could do as much disturbance by coming off plane in 50 to 70 feet of sportfish and or motor yacht, and then going your 2 3/4 miles at no wake speed, and then ramping back up as you reach the edge of the zone and getting back up on plane. I would also wonder, you know, what is the necessitation for, again, carve out the area in Hawks Channel and let traffic go as it has for years is my thoughts. I think pushback is going to be extremely large if we don't.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, I do not see any additional hands. We've been at this one for a good long while, a lot of good input. I appreciate that. We've got one more item listed in this category of zone related proposals, and I propose that we pursue that conversation, and then we can take a break before the next group of discussions, which are of a slightly different flavor. So Beth, if you can talk us through the Lower Keys Wildlife Management Area topic, and then we can have some discussion there and then take probably a break that everybody is ready for.
Sure. So this was identified in February as something that advisory council members would like to have a little bit more discussion on. And the two map slides I have show both the Lower Keys and the next one is Marquesas. These are the proposed wildlife management areas in the Lower Keys in the preferred alternative. The legend there shows those that are no entry, no anchor, idle speed, trolling only, and no motor. And the next slide shows those that are in the Marquesas region. And then finally, at that time when we solicited input on any draft proposals or motions for consideration, nothing was put forward for this topic, but just wanting it to be on the table for discussion and comment. And I can toggle between the map as well, but I'll capture any comment and discussion here.
Thank you, Beth. So I see a couple hands are raised on this topic. The first one I'm seeing is Karen Thurman. So Marlise, if we can invite Karen to offer her comments.
Okay, Karen, you're unmuted.
Oh, hi, Eric. Karen Thurman, not Karen Bonsack, I think. Although now her hand is down. So perhaps Karen Thurman, you have a helium hand too. I don't know.
No,
Okay, there, your hand is up. Did you have something you wanted to offer, Karen Thurman?
I do. Thank you.
Great.
I had trouble finding my comments earlier there. So overall, I've gotten tons of comments that there's just too many different kinds of restrictions in each of those wildlife management areas. It's going to be a challenge to educate people and to enforce people, and between switching from idle speed to no wake to no motor to no anchor, and there's a large number of no entry zones. And there's a noticeable expansion also of the no motor zones. So if we're going to protect the wildlife and the shallow water habitats, but there's no corresponding restriction for fishing in those zones. So kind of came back to that same theme of we're either going to protect everything or not. And if we're going to have a no motor, does that mean no boats powered by motor allowed in those areas either? So maybe we need to look at a way so we can kind of eliminate some of that or combine the areas or something.
Okay, simplify and then be, okay, got it. Anything else, Karen?
Again, that kind of feeds back into, clear markers for the area, but one or another.
Right.
It's got to be able to enforce it too.
Right. Okay, I see that Chris Berg and Ben Daughtry also have their hands up. Let's start with Chris, and then Ben, you're up. So Chris.
Thanks. I just ask everybody to think back to our last virtual meeting in which we discussed the idle speed around within 100 yards of all shorelines. From my perspective, that is an alternative to this. I think I agree with Karen and the people that gave her feedback that the number and the diversity of these different zones is somewhat baffling. And I think if it was the law that you had to slow down and idle when you got within 100 yards of the shoreline, that most of the concern for these wildlife populations, or much of it, would be taken care of. And if there are particular, whether it's wading bird colonies or whatever, that are more sensitive than that, if they're super sensitive, then I'd love to hear more about which ones those are from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who put most of these proposals on the table. Unfortunately, because of their staffing situation, they've been between managers and biologists for a while now. They haven't even been able to really take part in the public comment. They haven't been able to listen to these or participate in these sessions since September or thereabouts. So my suggestion is that we focus on that 100-yard sanctuary-wide slow zone with exceptions. It doesn't need to be everywhere. Obviously, there are marked channels and traditional routes that people run that run near shore and can stay that way as far as I'm concerned. But I think if we were to institute the 100-yard slow speed buffer and see how that works for these wildlife populations, that the refuge staff might find that they don't need to do anything more, and they can keep our lives and our landscape, our seascape simple by not having to post markers all over the place, not having the cost of maintaining those markers, etc. So I look at these two proposals, the shoreline slow speed and this, as alternatives to one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Okay, Ben Daughtry, you're up next, and then Will Benson has his hand raised. So if we can unmute Ben, it looks like you might be self-muted. Oh, there we go. Ben?
Yep. So
Hi.
I wholeheartedly agree with what Chris is saying, and when I publicly commented about my support for these shoreline slow speed zones, it was with that same concept that Chris said, that would be an alternative to, if not wholly, at least mostly an alternative to this kind of situation that's confusing, probably very hard to enforce, and a bunch of other issues. In addition to Chris's comment, one thing I want to talk about and mention, and I don't know, Beth, if you can go back one so we can look at the map of it.
Can you see it? I've
There's
gone back
always
to the Marquesas.
Go back another one then, if you would, please. Sorry about that. So within that second one back, we also have a bunch of banks on the bay side that have a bunch of polygons around them, and up there to the everybody's right-hand side, basically. And you know, there certainly are impacts on banks. I would reiterate what Steve Leopold has said, or some kind of understanding of what these polygons and shapes mean, because they're pretty vast. There's a lot of channels in between those banks that are used quite often. So whether it's, you know, the same concept, 100 yards from those banks, they're probably and likely not to be marked, I'm assuming. So that's going to be a real issue with that. And there's also a couple of conservation areas. These banks exist here and up at Channel Key, up off of Long Key, and also an existing conservation area. And from a standpoint of protecting resource, those conservation areas have me scratching my head. And unless they're going to be kind of research areas, which I know there's some interest from the state for sponge research and those kind of things, I think you call them what they need to be. But just clarifying lines on these banks, what the conservation area concept is back there. I know we don't have a lot of conservation areas on the backside, but just because we don't have them doesn't mean that that we need them or that we don't need them. So there should be some particular goals on what those are for. You know, if we're maximizing everybody's use while, you know, protecting the resource, what are we protecting there? I think that's the end of my comments on this.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. We've got Will Benson next, and then behind him is Mimi, and then Chris Benson has his hand up. So Will Benson, we're going to unmute you.
Good morning,
You are
everyone.
unmuted, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to support what Ben and before him, Chris, said about the 100 yards from shoreline. It's certainly a simplification of all of these marine zones. And my understanding is that, you know, we'd really, frankly, be able to accomplish more, make it clearer, and make it a whole lot easier to kind of effectualize the changes that we're looking for with that 100-yard shoreline, recognizing that there's obvious law enforcement problems that, you know, in terms of enforcing that 100-yard shoreline is going to be difficult. But I think if we can ingrain it into the boating culture, it goes a long way, which brings me back to a lot of these zones are created because of the large amount of boaters that have begun frequenting the Keys backcountry waters. It's an incredibly difficult place to navigate, and there's a lot of groundings and a lot of habitat destruction that goes on. And we seem to be unable or unwilling to do a boater's education, a mandatory boater's education course. So here we are trying to come up with some sort of spatial zoning, you know, recommendation to protect the habitat. I support fully the 100 yards from shoreline idea, and that also is an idea that we're working to, you know, with some of the fishing guides, the 100 some odd fishing guides in the Keys, to kind of narrow down the pinch point and the issues there. But I think that there's legs behind that, and I think it solves a lot of problems. That being said, there are other areas that aren't even included in this that are going to need additional zoning, particularly, for instance, west of Key West, right when you get past Northwest Channel, there's an area called the Tower Flats. It's a series of channels that almost every single day is impacted by somebody running aground. I mean, every single day, and it happens all over the place. We need to identify where those places are, and we need to, you know, provide some better marking. And that kind of goes back to what Ben was talking about with the banks off of Marathon back there. I fish those banks all the time, and I can tell you that it's just littered with prop scarring. Big boats, small boats, every kind of boat imaginable runs clear across those banks all the times. And, you know, whatever we intend to do here, I think providing protection is critical and needed. And really, I look to the Coast Guard here with better marking. I mean, they're the ones that are, you know, should be marking the larger channels, you know, where boats can run through. And there's just very few markers in that area. I mean, it is marked on the charts, but it's poorly marked. There's not enough markers. And I've witnessed everything from sailboats to, you know, large vessels grounding themselves on those banks over the last, you know, decade, if not longer. And it's the biggest single problem in that area. So I don't know how we want to tackle that issue, but I know that those banks are incredibly important and they receive a huge amount of groundings. As do most places where there are essentially banks that are away from islands. You know, we have some of these slightly offshore banks that are submerged that are hard to see. And those are areas that I think we should come up with some little bit more creative ideas on how to protect them. You know, open for discussion and open for ideas on that. But again, we get a long way forward with the 100 yards from shoreline approach. Makes it really simple. But I think protecting those banks is going to be key. And again, back to, I mean, every conversation that I've had with people since the October meeting, you know, where things blew up in Key West is focused on channel marking in the backcountry. And I have to sit there and say, well, you know, the you know, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has its take and the sanctuary has its take, and then you're not allowed to do this and allowed to do that. And it seems to be every local's response is, well, why can't we get some markers? All we want to do is be able to go to the sandbar and back, and we can't seem to get some markers because of some, you know, legal loophole that's being created here. So again, I challenge, you know, the sanctuary and all of us to come up with some ways of getting markers so that we can consolidate boat traffic and minimize, you know, habitat destruction. That's it.
Thank you, Will. And channel marking is going to be one of the topics we discuss after a break. So we will definitely come back to that one. We've got Mimi, Chris Benson, and Jerry Lorenz in line. So Mimi is next. If we can unmute Mimi.
You're unmuted.
You are unmuted.
Mimi.
Thanks.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. Yes, I totally agree that the more rational approach to protecting things would be to have something that is as easily understood as a 300-foot buffer, to get away from having signs everywhere, which are really unattractive and expensive to maintain. So I'm totally in agreement with that. I'm in agreement with the marking of the channels, because all of us that are out on the water see the damage that happens all the time because people don't, most of the marking that's out on these flats is little, you know, sticks or pieces of PVC that no one, unless you know what they mean, you don't know which side of that thing to go on. So that would help a great deal. The other thing I wanted to bring up is the, you know, West Country, the Marquesas closing, pretty much closing access to most of the island chain of the Marquesas is something that I'm not really clear why that is being proposed as, you know, as a good method of preservation. If it's turtle nesting that is the main concern, or what the bottom line is there. But I know that people that do guides out in these areas have been quite critical of a lot of the restrictions. And in fact, one of them, who's been the biggest cheerleader of natural protection for a long time, has decided to sell and leave, which breaks my heart. She's been here 50 years. But anyway, people are upset and concerned and don't understand the rationale behind some of these proposals. So I would like for some of that to be addressed as far as the proposed closure of the Marquesas Islands. And I agree with Ben and Will and the other speakers about streamlining things and making it more really effective in terms of protecting environmental habitats and less draconian. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Chris Benson has been very patiently waiting. Chris, let us unmute you, and you're unmuted, sir.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you. I'll try and be brief. I agree with what Mimi and Will and Chris and some of the others have mentioned already. Just a couple of things I'd like to add. Those of you that were at the meeting at the high school know there were certainly some contentious pushback from the public, especially with respect to some of the sandbars. And I know all of you are probably familiar. The areas that were of concern were Snipes and Marvin and Boca Grande. And it's my understanding from reviewing the maps and having frequented those areas myself that none of the areas where people enjoy anchoring and hanging out, none of those areas are being closed. There may be some difficulty in gaining access to some of those areas from the previously used routes. But other than that, I think it's very important to gain the public trust that the sanctuary makes very clear that those areas are not being closed if I'm looking at the maps correctly. My second concern is that if you sort of zoom out on the map and look at the 30,000-foot view, that if you start at, let's say, the western end of the 7 Mile Bridge or the Bay of Honda area and move west, there are additional 50 or so keys that are being proposed as no entry areas. And by that, I'm assuming that's complete closure of those areas. It was brought up earlier that I think the public is concerned that the sanctuary has to be able to demonstrate that if an area is closed, that they also have the ability to reopen it at some point in the future. But in my discussions with much of the public here over the past several months, there's great concern that such a vast number of areas are being completely closed, and I'm not sure that there's adequate justification. If I look at a lot of those areas, it would appear that the main reason is for nesting bird colonies. And other than a few keys which list the reddish egret and the white-crowned pigeon, none of the species that are listed for a vast majority of those areas proposed for closure is on anything other than the International Union for Conservation of Nature's category of least concern. And that means the populations are stable and increasing. So I guess I would hope that we could justify some science, or if someone in the study group could clarify the justification for complete closure of those areas, because it would seem to me that either idle speed or no motor, or what Will and others have mentioned, just simply the idle speed away from the shoreline might be adequate to protect those areas without complete closure, which the public foresees as indefinite. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. All right, Jerry Lorenz, you have been also patiently waiting. You are unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So that was a nice segue into what I had to talk about. My organization, the Audubon of Florida, did send in a comment letter addressing specifics in these areas that we feel are very important to various bird species, not just nesting, but roosting and foraging areas. We did a subset of these. Now, I do agree with Chris and everybody else at this point that, yeah, putting a shoreline buffer around most of these would greatly benefit the birds. But I have, in my experience working in Everglades National Park with wading birds, I have observed multiple times of fishermen and boaters, wildlife viewers, approaching colonies, and those colonies just disappear and they move someplace else. So the birds do have that ability. But for example, the large colonies at Frank Key and Porjo Key in Everglades National Park were abandoned because they got too much attention, whether that be fishermen or people approaching to see the birds or what have you. Now, the two examples in the park that were closed and have signage around them are Duck Key and Sandy Key, which have been persistent for as long as as long as they've been signed. And so we sent a list of what we felt were the most important areas that we're looking at here. Now, with that caveat, I'm saying that probably the 300-foot buffer would be a good start. We can look at that. But I don't think that you can just stop there. I think some signage is going to be needed at these particular places where we do have important nesting areas, particularly for great white herons, reddish egrets, white-crowned pigeons. And to speak to Chris's comment is that reddish egret, IUCN says that they're stable, but that's the most rare species of heron in the Western Hemisphere. And we just put out a paper that says their numbers are going down. So that was published maybe 2 years ago when we did a statewide survey of reddish egrets, and the numbers are way down from what they were historically. So I just feel that some extra protection needs to be provided to some of these areas, and even if you pull a boat up to go flats fishing, that does create disturbance. Like I said, I've seen this in Everglades National Park. So sorry for being long-winded, but the first step is to put the 300-foot shoreline closure, and then once we got that in place, is then take a look at these important bird areas and see if any of them are being disturbed to the point where we need to put up signs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the input. I don't see any new hands raised, but I see a couple of helium hands, but I think those are unintended. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Will's hand just popped up. I think it might be a real hand raise. I'm going to go ahead and unmute.
Okay, go ahead,
Will
Will.
Benson,
Yes,
you're muted.
it's a real hand raise. I want to back up what Jerry just said really quickly about that. You know, there are certain islands that obviously have a lot of birds roosting on them. And, you know, I think the fishing guides would be, you know, open to kind of earmarking those particular sensitive places on a case-by-case basis. And is, again, another example of where and how adaptive management can be used in this process. But I also want to offer up that, you know, it's not just the boats approaching on the water. It's also some of the overflight stuff that's happening. You know, I witnessed quite a bit of birds, you know, being disturbed because of low-flying aircraft. So I think that that's another consideration if we're going to talk about birds. You know, some things could be done better in that space as well. But again, I think everything that Jerry just said, especially with the reddish egret or with the reddish heron, that's a species I see very few of these days. I used to see a lot more of. There are definitely concerns there, and there's definitely sensitive islands out there that we could identify, prioritize, and if the birds move from one island to the next island for their roosting and they favor it, again, it's just another example of adaptive management and how we can, you know, work that into the scheme to get the best protection and the best, you know, most equitable management for all the users here. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is a good segue because adaptive management is a part of the next group of topics we are going to address, but I suggest we take a break at this point and break until, I see Jerry wants to follow up. If you can make it quick, Jerry, because we are between this group and the break. So if we can unmute Jerry real quick.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. Yes, I agree with everything that he just said. There have been examples of overflights ruining very large colonies, and that is a very good point. Is low-flying aircraft can literally destroy up in northwest Florida at Cedar Keys. There was a colony there of about 700 or 800 pairs of nesting birds, and they disappeared overnight because they were practicing helicopter flights over it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, so I believe Beth is going to put up a little timer, but we will start back up just right around noontime, a couple minutes after 12. And so everyone can stand up, stretch, breathe, take a break, and we will work to get through these last items. Again, I'm still aiming to try to get done close to 1. I think we can. I think some of the summary conversations we can do more quickly than we had planned in order to get you guys off this call close to 1 o'clock. So that's my goal. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll speak again just a couple minutes after 12. All right, hello everyone. Thank you, Beth, for that slick little countdown timer. I hope everyone was able to get a little break, fresh air, stretch. We have a number of topics to continue with, but I think it's pretty important to note they are of a considerably different flavor. And by that, I mean these relate to management plan aspects of the restoration blueprint. So these are non-regulatory. And as such, quite honestly, conversations about these topics can continue, and we will definitely continue discussing these beyond today's webinar to advance our planning and our thinking about these subjects. So I am going to invite Beth to introduce this section and then get us started on the first topic, which is water quality, law enforcement education, something we heard a lot about during the public comment period. Beth.
Okay, so the next slides include a handful of management plan activities, and as Sarah noted, these are non-regulatory, so would not be included as specific proposals in the draft rule, however, would be management plan activities. The first one is water quality, law enforcement, education, and outreach. And there on the slide, you can see if you want to follow along and refer in the restoration blueprint where these items are discussed for what the management plan activities would be or are intended to be related to these. You can go there in the restoration blueprint. The proposal that was put forward for discussion notes that the SAC has said it before many times. We heard the public commenters loud and clear, and we agree that the sanctuary and its constituent agency implementers and partners need to work even harder on water quality improvements within and beyond sanctuary boundaries, law enforcement capacity and staff retention, and outreach education efforts. And the statement below simply acknowledges that these are not the only issues that need to be addressed, but these this was intended to be an earlier discussion before we did all the regulatory. So that's why that caveat test is right there, that there are other proposals on the table for discussion. So with that, any
Thank you, Beth.
Other comments or additions?
And in the survey, I believe those that answered the survey, I think what we heard from some was, yes, we've heard loud and clear from the community that these are important issues and we need to really commit ourselves to working hard to address some of the issues that have been raised. So does anybody want to add anything beyond that at this point? I see that Stefan Patton's hand is raised. And Stefan, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. I think that there are certain things that we can talk about that might be very drastic, but has the sanctuary thought about suing to make sure that rules that the state of Florida have put in place and are not following are carried through? We've looked at the number of sewer hookups that aren't in place, and there's a huge number of people that are not in place, and the state and the county are not finding those people as they said they would for not hooking up to the sewer. That could be an issue. There are certain issues about discharge that the state said it was going to do into the Florida Bay that they're not complying with. Those are issues as well. So I know that states sue the federal government all the time. Can the federal government sue the state for non-compliance? I don't know.
Thank you, Stefan. I will be honest, lawsuits haven't been part of what's been discussed yet. We've been exploring different options to address some of the shortfalls. But thank you for bringing that question up. Karen Thurman has her hand raised and you are unmuted, Karen.
I'm not really sure if this is the if this where this falls under, but there was some issue about the chapter 327 of the Florida statute about personal watercraft being regulated the same as other vessels on the water of the state, and how that was going to affect what we tried to do, or one of the suggestions for changes in the refuge.
Beth, do you have any background or info?
So I do. So that that was one of the items that we discussed on the March 24th session, and I can revisit really quickly now, and then if needed, I can go to those slides for what was discussed. And that was a specific marine zone proposed regulation to provide relief for personal watercraft to go into the National Wildlife Refuge where they are otherwise prohibited. PWCs, water skiing, and airboats are prohibited from the National Wildlife Refuge marine zones. But the proposal was to provide a little bit of relief for PWC operation in the refuge in the vicinity of the shipping channel right around Key West. So that item was discussed on the March 24th meeting, and we have received both that day and through the formal regulations.gov public comment process, we have received further public comment about that, clarification for that, and the concerns that you raised right now, Karen, have been provided through those public comment forums.
Okay, so I'm sorry to make you revisit that, but did we come up with some way to keep watercraft out of the shipping lanes? Like that area by marker 13?
So I can show real quick. I can find it here. Oh, I don't have it in this presentation with the images. If you go to, in the restoration blueprint, if you go to page 56 is where this topic and this proposed modified regulation is discussed in text, and there is an image there on page 56 that shows the proposal for relief of PWC operation in the Key West National Wildlife Refuge.
Yeah, it just seemed like originally, in an effort to keep them away from the tarpon fishermen, I believe, that we were sort of pushing them into the shipping channel.
The intent is to provide them to be able to go around the fishing channel and go into the National Wildlife Refuge.
Okay, it just really looked like we were going to push them right out into having to share a waterway with big Navy boats and cruise ships, and that looked like a really bad idea. Maybe we could just look at that again at a different time, but it really appeared to me that was making it worse instead of better.
Okay. I see a couple of other hands. Joe Weatherby has his hand up. If we can unmute Joe. And looks like Joe may be self-muted. If you're speaking, Joe, we're not here. Oh, there we go.
Sorry.
There we go. Go ahead.
The new Android is giving me hassles. Yeah, as far as the water quality issues, you know, we've heard lots and lots about water quality issues, and I'm not sure why, but it's my sense, it's my feeling that why are we not testing the water that's coming into the Keys? If this really is an important issue, these tests aren't very expensive, And, you know, we have sewage leaking from the shallow injection wells. We have who knows what coming down from, you know, from up north. And we also have, you know, on occasion, you know, gray and black water ballasted outside our borders. And I think that if we, you know, we have a lot of people that have a lot of big brains. If we put it together, we could probably put together a regimen of water quality testing so we can identify what's actually out there. And maybe when we see things change, if that matches up chemically with what's in the water, we may be able to begin to get an idea of what the actual impacts of certain kinds of contaminants in the water could be doing to our environment. I think the fact that we're all talking about it and no testing is going on is kind of, it seems like that should be the first thing we ought to be looking at. So I don't know if we can put together, if there's any interest in, or if there was, maybe some people from different places in the Keys, or people who have water quality as one of their biggest issues. I know I'm one. Might look at that.
Thank you. Okay, I think that Mimi's hand may be raised, although I'm not sure if that's real or artificial, because Mimi, are you interested in commenting here?
And I think I have to put my hand down to get recognized.
How funny, weird.
So a couple comments. Joe just spoke to one of my main concerns was that I don't know how much coordinated testing is taking place. There's a lot of comments that have been made about the shallow well problem with contributing to nearshore pollution, as well as, you know, we now know that things have come back along the coast from north of us, as well as, you know, being brought up to us in the other direction by the Gulf Stream. So I wondered if a serious consideration of maybe getting a group trained, like Shelley Kruger was doing, of citizen scientists up and down the Keys that could do periodic testing and maybe give, you know, some substantial data to be amassed and then could be followed up on if there's something occurs that seems to be warranted. You know, you could get someone who has more high-powered equipment in that particular area just to verify the data. That would be something that I would propose might be a real benefit, just so that we know what's coming in, where it's coming from. The other thing is I've had a lot of comments on the difficulty of being able to follow what the water quality protection group is working on, and the difficulty of finding any of the agendas or the minutes from past meetings. So I'm recommending that be more available to the public who's interested. They would like to be able to see what's going on with that group and maybe be able to contribute some suggestions. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Mimi. And I know the Water Quality Protection Program has been briefed all along about this process and the fact that we're hearing loud and clear from people about concerns related to water quality. And there is recognition that there needs to be additional effort made to be more transparent. And then the idea even came up to have a joint meeting with the Water Quality Protection Program and this advisory body, which because we've been a little bit distracted with Restoration Blueprint, we haven't scheduled that yet, but we're hoping to do that at some point in the future. And so stay tuned for more on that. I don't see any new hands. And in the interest of time, I'm thinking, since we've, you know, obviously there's lots more to be discussed relative to water quality, law enforcement, education, outreach. It's not our last chance to talk about it. I know there's been some interest in the topic of channel marking already brought up, so I suggest we move to that and get some initial thoughts on this. Again, it's not a topic we have to finish today, but if there are some burning thoughts that people want to offer, I'll let Beth introduce this, and then we can hear from the council and alternates on this topic. Go ahead, Beth.
So this was one of the issues identified by the Advisory Council for further discussion needed. I do note on this slide that on page 70, under Management Plan Goal 3, Objective 3, Activity 4, there's some more detail about marker, mooring, channel, and information buoys, and sort of the intent of management plan activities the sanctuary could take. And so you can refer to that. So you have that in front of you as you're having this discussion. And as Sarah noted, we've already had some discussion of this related on the wildlife management area topic. So I can pull that into this slide when we're done here. But there was no specific proposal submitted in advance for this topic.
So again, more conversation definitely will be had on this subject and how once we have some decisions or next group of proposals, what makes sense in terms of marking in collaboration with those proposals. But does anybody have any burning thoughts that they want to put out there, sort of big picture on this channel marking topic? I see Chris Berg's hand has raised, but it looks like it might have been raised for a while. Chris, you're off mute if you wanted to say something on this topic.
Thanks. I have a question for you. There's a perception among some, or a rumor, or whatever you want to call it, that the sanctuary removes the homemade channel markers. Can you verify or
we do not
that?
We deny that.
Do you happen to know if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service refuges remove them? I know they're not on the phone to ask.
I do not know.
So I don't know either. I don't think so. But I hear that a lot. And I think if we can get the answer from the Fish and Wildlife Service, it would be good to know. But I do think that the time has come for another really serious look at this issue. I certainly don't think we can mark every channel and every route, but there are obviously primary routes that are frequently used and often marked with homemade markers. Yep. And if we can improve upon that, I think that could be a good thing.
Yes, and we can try to follow up on your question to our partners at the Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you, sir. I see that Will Benson has his hand raised as well, and you are unmuted, Captain Benson.
Thank you, Chris. It's my understanding that the original backcountry waterway that was marked, going back to the Secret Service and Harry Truman's days down here, was removed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife because it was a wilderness area. And I'm not exactly sure exactly what they're considering to be wilderness, if it is the upland portions of the mangroves or it is the bay bottom or the waters. I don't think that they've ever actually definitively said what is considered wildlife areas and what is not. But either way, they felt the need to take the markers out. And then they've similarly felt the need to, put new markers back in, designating, idle speed places and no entry zones and whatnot. So it seems clear that they're, capable of working with this on this. I think that we're long past the, idea of the backcountry being this, pristine wilderness area. Even though I know that it is, there's still a lot of boats that are going back there that are using specifically some of the beaches and some of the running lanes going out to the Gulf. And I just think it makes a whole lot of common sense to come up with some tasteful, strategic marking that essentially accomplishes, the routes that people are primarily using to get to and from those highly trafficked areas. So I would move to get a definitive answer from U.S. Fish and Wildlife on what they consider to be within their jurisdiction, and what is a wildlife area. Does it involve the bay bottom? Does it involve the water? And where do they stand in regards to these markers? Also, I would like to get some clarification from the Coast Guard, because it's my understanding that they're the ones that are going to be perhaps opposing this for various reasons, on whether they intend to work with us on this or not. And then can it come down to the sanctuary, or can it come down to the county or the city or whatnot that can work to put these markers in place? Sorry, my kids are telling me there's an iguana, so I have to.
It's wonderful to hear. Thank you. All right. I do not see any additional hands. Again, this is not the last time we're going to be talking about this. Thank you for the input so far on this, and thank you in advance for conversations we're going to continue on this subject, because I think there is definitely more to come on this topic. And the next topic, I know that at least one person is going to raise their hand to want to talk about this. Beth, can you tee up the discussion about artificial reefs?
Yes. So the topic of artificial reefs, artificial habitats, is included in the restoration blueprint in the management plan section, and that you can find on page, actually I think it's page 71, goal 3, objective 3, activity 8, evaluate and monitor effects of artificial habitats and use patterns on sanctuary resources, and then there are a few sub-bullets there. And we did have a proposal put forward for advisory council discussion and consideration that the subject of artificial reefs be discussed by the core group and or full advisory council. Certain types of artificial reefs and habitat restoration activities be identified as priorities. And so I don't know if the individual who put that forward wants to provide some more context.
Thank you, Beth. So I'm waiting to see. Oh, look at that. Joe Weatherby's hand went up. Joe Weatherby, you are self-muted, sir. We will await your comments on this. There we go.
I'm technologically challenged, I think, a little bit
That's
today.
okay. So are we, my friend. So are we.
I've heard some of that. What goes around comes around, I guess. Yeah. Friends and colleagues, to most of you, my position on artificial reefs is known. We are planning on moving forward with some of the discussed larger artificial reef projects in Marathon and in Isla Mirada. We've also, and some of you know about this, I've also been working closely with Will Benson and a group of people from the community to talk about some other types of artificial reefs. And I will make a couple of comments here. The I do not see a future of the Florida Keys marine habitat as not including new artificial reefs. I can't imagine an effective program that does not encompass reefing of some type. I see and believe in all of or most of the actions that we are taking as a Sanctuary Advisory Council. I don't agree with all of it, but largely I do, most of it. I also think the time is now for doing it. We won't have much of an environment left. The new diseases are moving a lot faster than we are used to. I believe that everything we are proposing is on some level experimental, and I believe that it has been amply demonstrated within this community that artificial reefs have a place. Part of this is that artificial reefs, we can see results from these reefs in inside of a year. and some of these long-term, some of the long-term methods and methodology we're going to use to try and do a better job of conserving our environment take much longer than that. I think that, and again, I like all of it. I believe all of it to be experimental on some level, but I believe that artificial reefs are, we don't know everything about artificial reefs or anything else that's being proposed, but we should not throw the baby out with the bath, and we should not be shy about implementing, not just the ships. I think everybody gets the benefits of that. That's pretty obvious. But I think also there are other types of artificial reefs, like to encourage or build habitat for bait fish, or fishing, no fishing, diving, no diving areas, where we could lead the world in understanding this methodology and its role in a conservation management plan. And I think we should do that. I would agree with Dan Basta when he spoke with in front of our group a couple of years ago, when he encouraged this and also encouraged outside of the box thinking. So I think that I also think that when Beth was citing the management plan, um, the language describing artificial reefs and their role, and you have me at a loss because I've already done this homework, but I'm not standing at home. But the artificial reefs and their role, I believe in the management plan is what's in draft in there now is pessimistic in its outlook, and I believe it reflects some old thinking and conclusions. Artificial reefs are one of the most studied things in the marine environment, and there's a vast library of new information and new technology coming aboard to do this. So if it's okay, I would like to submit a draft I have using some maybe more modern language to describe it in the management plan. And I believe that we should be not only allowing this, but we should be actively encouraging some type of artificial reef development if we want to maintain our breeding stock of fish and our economy for the long term. That's
Thank you,
what I
Joe.
got to say.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. There are a couple of other council members with hands raised. I see Lisa Mongilia and Will Benson. We'll start with Lisa. We will unmute you. You are unmuted.
Hello, fellow council members. It's been I think, productive meeting so far. What I would like to do is kind of build on Joe's comments about the importance of artificial reefs and artificial habitat restoration, from the big ships down to the bait habitats, and really be able to use this as before mentioned citizen science projects, educational outreach projects. If a lot of universities come down here, a lot of high schools, a lot of marine biology programs, we've got Moat Marine, we've got a lot that's going on in the sanctuary that is studying a variety of topics. And I think, the less coral they have to survey, the less fish that they have to count, we can offer some alternative programs to help in the monitoring and to encourage them to help in the citizen science to complement what the National Marine Sanctuary is doing.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate the input. Will Benson, we're going to go to you next, and then Mimi, you will be on deck. Will, you are self-muted, sir. There you go.
All right, now I'm not muted anymore. Thank you. I'll be quick. I have been talking with Joe and working with others in the community to explore artificial reefing and, by extension, habitat restoration. We can envision everything from the big, ships all the way to the inshore smaller coral head type features, bait fish habitat, but also, as far as mangroves, sponge restoration, all of that's kind of included in a broader topic of habitat restoration. And Joe and I had kind of envisioned a group or a body that can get together and use the principles of adaptive management to take a look at these particular projects on a case-by-case basis and marry them with an appropriate regulatory framework, so that we're essentially, building science into these projects from the very beginning. We're monitoring the science, and then we're considering what kind of adaptive, regulations that we can bring. Is it a habitat or an artificial reef that's closed permanently? Is it open part of the year, closed part of the year? Is it a dive site? Is it a fishing only site? And can we, kind of learn from the science and learn from this approach to be very fluid with our adaptive management approach, and essentially ramp up the production of our marine ecosystem? Again, with an eye towards conservation first and foremost. The idea would be to restore the habitat, to get the productivity up in the ecosystem, so that any kind of projects would have a net positive effect. That's the very first operating principle. But there's really clear and obvious ways that I think of artificial reefing can fit into, I guess, the overall ecosystem that we work with here, the economic ecosystem as well. For instance, if we're talking about protecting coral heads off of some of the sandbows or something, and that may affect some of the fishermen, can we partner with some of the fishermen to discuss other options that might work for them in terms of providing suitable habitat, or for instance an offshore fish attractant device, a FAD, which are widely used throughout Central America to some great positive extent there. I think there's a room for us to work with the communities like fishermen who have been kind of put out by a lot of the National Marine Sanctuary, and this could be a real positive kind of piece that we can introduce into the equation and say, listen, we want to protect this habitat, it's really important, but can we look at other ways that we can manage our environment here and get productivity out of the fishing? And are those places available for catch and release fishing? Are they catch and keep? But really starting to include some of the fishermen and some of the other constituencies that come into that kind of that approach with looking at the comprehensive big scale picture of all the habitats. So that's something I look forward to. I similarly don't envision a future here that doesn't involve that, and I think that we could be world leaders with habitat restoration and artificial reefing here in the Keys that could be widely used elsewhere to help with the recovery. And thank you.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it. Mimi, you also wanted to make a comment. We will unmute you. Hang on one second. There you go. You're unmuted, Mimi.
Jet going over. There he goes. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm the party pooper here. I have concerns that have not yet been allayed about artificial reefs in terms of their function and their purpose, and from problems in the past with them that I don't think have been really addressed. I would really like to work with a group to help understand better how they think that it's going to contribute to the benefit of the natural environment. That's my big concern, is that there are a lot of negatives in terms of the surfaces of artificial reefs and what how they have encouraged the spread of invasive species, what the function of them is, whether it's just to concentrate fish and thereby make it easier for people to catch fish on them. If they're just for restoration, it's a different thing. But nonetheless, I still have concerns about what's being envisioned and how it would be used to actually augment what we have and not draw some of the potential benefit that would happen on the natural ecosystem. So I understand, I mean, I'm involved in a sponge restoration project, so I get that I'm sort of part of it too, in that I'm trying to boost the production in an area where it was destroyed from natural circumstances, but nonetheless, I'm putting out pieces of rock and stuff that weren't there in an effort to try and benefit it. So I don't want to be hypocritical about it, but I do have concerns, and I would like to be involved in further discussions, just because I don't want us to just plow forward and have unintended consequences that, further the decline of the natural ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. I see that Ken Niedermeyer's hand is up, and Jerry Lorenz is also interested in speaking. Ken, you are unmuted, and Jerry will go to you next.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's a lot of different things that could go on here, but I think first of all, I've had an artificial reef, quote unquote, a live rock farm for about 20 years now. No, more than that, 25 years. And it's an amazingly productive area. I mean, it's a juvenile fish sanctuary. That's where they recruit out of the plankton and land on the live rock site, and they live there, and then they move out. So there's this ongoing discussion: are artificial reefs, production or attraction? And they're both, and it just depends on how they're developed and what they look like and where they're placed. But I think there's certainly a role for artificial reefs and other artificial structures. And I think that, and I hate to say this, but our coral cover in the sanctuary is on the downward slide, and it's probably going to continue. We're going to make headway in some areas, but overall, it's going down, and people realize that, and they go elsewhere to dive and to see coral. So I think there's going to be a need to, if we're Department of Commerce, NOAA's Department of Commerce, attract commerce down here. So, bring people down to see something else, okay, we'll see a sculpture park, we'll see a artificial wreck, or things like that. So I think I'd like to see the sanctuary be a little more open to artificial reefs, artificial structures, that kind of thing. I just, I'm concerned that our natural resources are really taking a hard hit. And I'm usually pretty much an optimist, but it doesn't look good. And it's not going to come back in our lifetime. As much damage has been done. So I guess, can we enhance fisheries by creating certain types of artificial structures? Can we enhance dive experience by creating, say, sculpture parks or something else? I just think we need to be a little more open to that, given the rate of change and the nature of the challenges we're facing. And that's all I got to say about that.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. Clearly, there's a lot more discussion that needs to happen on this topic. And today, Jerry wanted to make a comment. So, Jerry, we're going to unmute you. Looks like let's see. There you are. You are unmuted, Jerry.
Very good. So many years ago, the SAC discussed casitas, and I'm not opposed to artificial reefs. I understand what is being said here, but it does have to be carefully regulated, I think, or we're going to end up with people setting out things just to attract lobster, and that's it. So that's my comment. Is we had a lot of discussion about casitas, and they're illegal, and so we just got to keep in mind that they can be used to exploit, very, very much so. So that's my comment.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have two more topics that we could probably talk 2 hours on each. I wanted to get to those. Once again, broken record here, but we're going to continue discussions on all of these, I am sure. So let us, if you don't mind, move to the topic of carrying capacity, something that came up a lot in the context of our discussion of potential limited entry areas. Beth, if you want to tee this up, and then we can invite some high-level comments on this subject as well. And then we'll do the last one, which is adaptive management. So Beth, take it away.
So this topic, the issue of carrying capacity and user fees, was identified at the February meeting as a priority for further discussion. And I have noted there the elements in the restoration blueprint, the 3 .4.5, the limited use access restrictions for specific sanctuary preservation areas. So that's just referencing where this concept is proposed in a regulatory way, and we did discuss that on the March 24th call. And then carrying capacity, the issue of that is covered in the management plan, and noting the need to do additional research of use patterns in the sanctuary and if and how that data could be used to inform management activities. And then finally, specific to user fees, this is included in the considered and eliminated section of the restoration blueprint. I will just note that on all of these topics, we did receive a lot of different public comment on the proposed zones and the concepts of carrying capacity, user fees, as well as a lot of creative ideas about how carrying capacity could be managed, how limited use areas could be implemented. And we are also doing a compilation of a whole host of different ways limited use restrictions are put in place in zones throughout the marine environment. So I'll leave it at that for discussion.
Thank you, Beth. Another subject that has many directions we can take it, lots of, as Beth noted, comment that we received during the public comment period, those that provided input on the survey that was sent out after the last council webinar. There were comments on this topic submitted there. I'm beginning to think that probably the next step with regard to each of these topics that we are tackling in this part of our call since 12 o'clock, I'm imagining wanting to go back to the core group and have a conversation about how do we as a Sanctuary Advisory Council want to tackle these such that we can give them their due attention moving forward. So I'm going to invite council members and alternates to raise your hand if you want to chime in at this point on anything on here, although I'm not seeing any hands going up, not even helium hands. So it may be that people recognize that this one is something we need to, I see Stefan raised his hand. So Stefan, we will unmute you and you can offer any thoughts you have here. Go ahead, sir.
All right. I think that this might be sort of time sensitive in that things are changing because of this coronavirus, and businesses are going out of business left and right here in the Keys. And I think there's going to be fewer people utilizing the waters than there were 6 months ago. And I think it's an opportunity for us to look at, do we license people that are currently utilizing the waters, and then look at how we can logically move forward with how do we get to what the carrying capacity really is of the reef and of the environment that we're looking at. I think that it also might be financially beneficial to some individuals if they had a permit or a license or a medallion, whatever you want to call it, that gives value to their business, whether that be fishing or snorkeling or scuba diving, that is something that we should look at, and we should probably look at it sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. We have already been starting to have some conversations internally, recognizing that what we are all experiencing as a community is we need to really think through what that's going to change in terms of the context of some of these conversations. And right now that's hard to predict, but it's also what can be predicted is that there will be some changes that are the result of what we're experiencing now, and what does that mean in the context of some of these decisions we're facing. So thank you for that input. I see that Chris Berg also had his hand raised. We will unmute you, sir, and you can offer your thoughts. Hang on one second. There we go. We got you unmuted, sir.
Thank you. Well, I think
Sarah, I think you proposed that this is going to take a lot more thinking. I do think we should commit to doing that. But I think we should, when we set about that, obviously, keep the sanctuary's perspective and what the sanctuary can do at the forefront. But it may very well be that it is a different entity. It could be the Fish and Wildlife Commission, or it could be Monroe County, or you name it. That actually is the appropriate implementer of whatever scheme we come up with. And I just, having participated in the sanctuary's efforts for a long time, in this process for a long time, and seen both the the sort of desire on the part of the council and others to get to the bottom of this, and just thus far we have not. We've you guys punted on user fees. We still don't have a very we need to really establish some goals. What do we want to get by limiting carrying capacity? What do we want to get by charging fees, and then create proposals that we can test and see how well or how poorly they give us what we want. This obviously bleeds into the discussion of adaptive management coming up next, but just to reiterate, it may be that some other entity other than the sanctuary is really the right entity to implement some of this stuff, and we should keep our minds open to that.
Fair point. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. I see that Will Benson has raised his hand. Sir, we will unmute you and you can provide your comment. You are self-muted. There we go.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Chris said, can you say whether the sanctuary is able, willing, or considering licensing at this point? I mean, is that something that you feel comfortable commenting on? Because I don't want to waste time if we're just not going to do it here. Where does the sanctuary stand?
So Will, on the question of licensing, I am not aware of a authority that would, I'm trying to racking my brain here, if there is some mechanism in our authorities that would allow us to be the one doing any licensing. I think Chris was pointing out that some of the other partners who have overlapping jurisdiction may be the right places to do that. But I'll see if Beth wants to chime in on something I may not be thinking of from the policy perspective.
No, I don't have anything further at this time.
So at this point, if the sanctuary is not in the business of doing licensing, which is what I think we're talking about, the role that we can fulfill here might be to identify, what we would maybe want in licensing, using what metrics or what data, what carrying capacity might look like, using, science and citizen input to then guide the process. Would that maybe be more like how we would actually work this issue?
That seems to be yes. And then as Chris was suggesting, sort of identifying first and foremost, what is it we're trying to achieve? And then from there, what are the mechanisms to get there and who needs to be involved? If it's not something the sanctuary can execute, who does the sanctuary need to partner with to execute those proposed strategies?
Right. It just seems like this is this seems like a pretty big topic, and it seems like it's very complicated, and it might be a lot bigger than just as big as our sanctuary is in the Florida Keys. If it involves the state or other partners at the federal level, it might even be wildly bigger than what we're thinking right now. So I just want to kind of vocalize that as we all as a council consider this, just the scope of what licensing or limited entry might look like is a very big, vast, complicated topic, and might be its own separate beast, so to speak, apart from this DEIS, process. But anyway, I don't know. Yes. I just wanted to throw some concerns out there. If we dive into this thing, how far are we really going to get?
Yeah. Okay, I see a couple other hands have gone up. Karen Thurman and Joe Weatherby's hands are both raised. So we'll start with Karen and we'll take you off mute if you have some comments. Go ahead, Karen.
It's really short and sweet. A lot of individuals were really worried about having to pay user fees or anything like that. It's, there's not a lot free left for people. A lot of commercial operations were very concerned about having some sort of additional licensing fee. Some of the Upper Keys guides that fish in the park were kind of comparing it to the fees that they have to pay to get into the national park. And then once again, I have to throw in we don't have a lot of law enforcement out there. We just don't. So trying to enforce that would be somewhat of a trick too.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate it. Joe Weatherby, your hand is raised. We will unmute you, sir. You are self-muted, so when you unmute, you can speak. There you go.
Yeah, I think that I've been in a lot of discussions over, at one point we even set aside a committee at the sanctuary to discuss user fees. Nothing really materialized about that, but I think user fees and limited entry, we are about the business of setting up a restoration blueprint that, if history's any judge, it's 30 years till we do another one. I believe in the next 30 years or 10 years, I think that we're going to get to a place where either we're underwater from climate change or we need to consider some type of limited entry. And that would be, which captains, which boats, which operations, which activities. But I do think that one way, when we talk about, what was it, 60% of the people that were out on boats was up in 1 year last year, a couple of years ago. I do think that if we start, if we're not already, if we're starting to get to issues of carrying capacity and issues of, big issues of overfishing or any of these things, it can be addressed by user fees. And, the higher the user fees, the less people that are out there. I think that also by grandfathering figuring out a system to grandfather who can participate in this will protect our local businesses and will serve to limit some of the activity. I don't know if we're there yet, and I don't think any of this is going to be real effective till we get our arms around water quality. But I do think we ought to be looking at it, and we ought to be discussing limited entry, not just for fishing, but for all these activities and user fees. But I think it would be a mistake to implement them immediately before we see what we can do about some of the other challenges. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you and others bringing up some of the important issues that will need to be considered and wrestled with on this topic. If I may bring us to the last large topic that we wanted to touch on, one that we have made mention of previously in today's webinar, and that's adaptive management. Another one that is a very important conversation to have. Beth, if you can introduce this further, and then we can have any conversation we need to on this one.
Sure. Specific to adaptive management in the restoration blueprint, primarily the application of this is through the emergency regulations, and just emergency regulations have been applied on 3 separate occasions in the history of the sanctuary. But this was in reviewing the current regulations, this was the means by which we felt adaptive management could be executed. The draft proposal that was put forward for consideration is, again, I propose a fully articulated description of what adaptive management is and how step-by-step a constituent or stakeholder group can engage with the sanctuary process to challenge, increase, or decrease, or otherwise alter any of the rules we are making. Our citizens should understand that they can affect change. I propose the core group and/or SAC discuss adaptive management vis-a-vis how it is worded in this document and how it is used in our sanctuary in more detail, and if agreeable, provide feedback on appropriate language which addresses application.
Thank you, Beth. So, would anyone like to offer any thoughts on this concept? I see Chris Berg's hand just popped up. You are unmuted, sir.
Thank you. Again, I think this is worthy of a whole effort, a whole workshop, whatever it is. It's a big, complicated topic, but I do want to say I think that although the emergency regulations are important, they are generally, you're stopping something from happening until you determine whether or not you need to regulate that thing. But I guess my sense is that adaptive management can and should also cut the other way, which is when do we eliminate restrictions or regulations, or and under what circumstances. So I just want to make sure that I'm on record saying that I think those emergency regulations are important, but I think that's only at best one side of this topic. So, I hear different adaptive management concepts being floated around, for instance, the idea that, and this was actually done out at Dry Tortugas National Park with the institution of the Research Natural Area, since the major regulators out there, the park and the Fish and Wildlife Commission, weren't quite in agreement. They said, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it in a time-limited way, and we're going to have clear goals. We're going to measure our success or our lack of success, and we're going to revisit this periodically. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what we need to do with every regulation or any regulation in the sanctuary, but that sort of thing, setting out to accomplish something, implementing it and measuring it to see if it's working on a recurring basis, and making modifications based on what you learn, to me that's adaptive management, or that's the kind of adaptive management that I think we should be driving towards.
Thank you, sir. I see that Mr. Weatherby has raised his hand, so we shall unmute you and go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I pretty much, I submitted the comments about adaptive management, and I think that that's one of the best concepts of what we're proposing. And I was going to mention this in the artificial reef thing, but I think what I witnessed in some of the meetings is that this is a public resource, and some of the public has a lot of pushback about some of this. I think that we're proposing some big sweeping changes because we believe that these things will help our environment in the Florida Keys, but we've made no provision or mention of measuring that. And I think that, I don't know how I would approach adaptive management. If I saw a problem, I know how I would do it. But if I said, geez, I can't even see the coral for all the gray snapper here at Western Dry Rocks, how do you relax some of the conditions? Where we should be talking about these sacrifices that the public is making, we ought to have a yardstick to measure and publish what the effects are, good or bad, of the policies that we're putting in place now. And we ought to articulate a way where citizens could band together and at least have a concern or a question considered under a formal process under adaptive management. And again, I don't know that we need to do it with all things, but I think that certainly in terms of money going for experimental cures for the environment, we ought to be talking about it, because I think the opportunity to, from one view, the opportunity to tell the public how many lobster are in a certain area, or how we're seeing signs of the coral growing back. That I think would be fair to the public to be able to hear about the success or failures of some of the efforts, and then if there's really a bone of contention, a process by which an average person could approach adaptive management to get something changed or enhanced, or and I'm not sure that I know the sanctuary is about that, making things better, but I don't know how the process would work for some regular person who's not a captain or a scholar I just don't see a way. I don't see an angle to it to be able to have the discussion. So I think I don't know. Maybe we could form a process for that.
Okay, thank you, sir. I don't see any other hands that have been raised or chats that people who can't raise their hands need to speak. So, and I'm also mindful of the time. We are 2 minutes over. So I suggest we invite our chair to provide a few next step comments, and we'll discuss kind of our thoughts on moving forward from here. I appreciate everyone's input on these conversations. I know we've only barely scratched the surface on many of these topics, but Mr. Chairman, would you like to speak about next steps?
Sure.
We'll need to mute Clint. Oh, there we go. Good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I agree with Chris, what you said earlier, and Sarah, you too, that there's a lot of these topics here in the management plan section that could certainly warrant further discussion at our SAC meetings coming up, which is probably pretty good timing. So first, thank you all again for participating today. And I know we had a couple technical issues there up front, but I think that we've figured out what caused that initially, so we shouldn't have that issue, hopefully moving forward. And I just want to remind everybody that after the March 24th meeting, Beth had sent out that survey, and it covered all of these items today and all of the items that we discussed at our last meeting. And in each survey question, it referenced the page numbers in the blueprint where you can kind of look up that item, make sure you've got the full scope of what we're talking about. And then for each one of those survey questions had all 4 alternatives. And you were able to choose which alternative most aligned with your stakeholder position. Unfortunately, we only had about a 50% completion rate of that survey. And the survey was sent to both the members and the alternates because we want the sanctuary and the superintendent to have as broad SAC input as she could possibly get, as they could get. And I just think it's vitally important that each of you take the time now, specifically now because we're coming to the end of this process, to go through the survey and choose which alternative you think is best and to provide the comments that you have for that matter. We just had this discussion recently on the user fees. When I answered the survey, I have a lot to say about that. And I put a lot of my personal comments reflecting my observations in there. And I encourage you all to do the same thing. This is really your opportunity to be quote unquote on the record of how you stand on all these various issues. Beth is going to be sending out obviously another survey. It's going to be covering again all these things we talked about today. And I'm going to also ask Beth to send out the survey previously to anybody that did not respond, to give them another opportunity to do so. And then, it was the 2011 condition report that inspired this SAC to take action. to do something to protect our natural resources, which, as was pointed out, were and currently are in decline. Our sanctuary is the lifeblood of our communities and our economy. And it's also the fertile nursery to so many species and a home to a diversity of ecosystems. So this body, we embarked on creating change, effectuating change in the restoration blueprint 8 years ago. And we have received thousands of comments from the public, our partners, from each member and their alternates from the SAC. We've spent thousands, or not thousands, but we've spent literally hundreds of hours over this 8-year period, really going through in detail on all of these matters that we're discussing now. And it's really important, and it's frankly our responsibility to be able to provide our input to the superintendent and to staff. So at this point, it's time for the superintendent and the sanctuary to take all of this input that they've been gathering and to begin working on version 2 of the restoration blueprint, or the DEIS. I just want to remind everybody also that once the next draft becomes available, that everyone is going to have another opportunity to be able to provide, our comments and public comment, our partner comments. So we're going to be basically going through the same process again. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, they're all ears. They've been attentively listening to what every constituency stakeholder group has been communicating to us. And I'm excited both to carry on the conversations for some of these management plan issues, but also to get that version 2 so that we can really start, as Steve Leopold mentioned earlier, having the actual coordinates down and really having some more specificity. So be on the lookout for an email from Beth with that last survey. And then finally, I just hope that all of you and your loved ones are healthy and safe out there. It's a time to come together as a community. And again, just thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Beth, do you have anything to add in terms of the survey and clarifying for folks what to expect or how to do that?
Yes. So I will show this, if I can find my cursor, show this slide, which just shows as of yesterday, as Clint noted, we had about 50% of all the advisory council members, alternates, and municipality members had responded to the initial survey. So good response, but more is better. We want to hear from everyone, give everyone an opportunity. So I will be resending the survey out. And those of you who did not have an opportunity yet to fill it out, please fill it out. And those of you who would like to add more content can do so as well. And I can incorporate that into your original response. We are still waiting for our state partner comments. We expect to get those comments within the next week or so. Definitely by April 30th, we expect to have both DEP and FWC comments. So in light of some of you, I'm sure, wanting to see those comments and have that inform your final input here, we'll make the survey due by Tuesday, May 5th. So you'll have a little bit more time after those comments come in, and I'll make sure to distribute those to the Advisory Council. There also will be posted to regulations.gov along with all of the other public comments. And just don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions about filling out the survey, difficult accessing it, etc. The outcomes of that survey we will make available, and we will indicate by seat and member alternate whether there's support or concurrence for various proposals or not. And any general input will just be included as a summary from what we received through this survey. So specific concurrence with any of these draft proposals from the Advisory Council and comments submitted will be noted by seat, and any additional input will just be general summary in the document.
Karen Thurman has her hand up. Let's see if she has a question about what has just been described as sort of next steps. Karen, you're unmuted.
I'll sidebar with Beth just because I don't see myself as submitting comments, and I did, and she called me, so I must have done something wrong or had a technical glitch there, but I'll sidebar with her. Thank you.
Okay, yep.
Okay, I'll follow up with you, Karen. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I don't see any more hands. I just want to again apologize for the technical difficulties we had at the beginning of this. Thank you for your patience with us as we sorted out that. Thank you to the staff who were scrambling to figure out a plan B and a plan C. And we look forward to hearing from you all on your comments on through the survey. And then at that point, we are going to have what we need to take all of this input, synthesize it into a single alternative that will go back out. So just a sincere thank you for today and for all of the time and effort that you all have put into this process, as Clint noted, for the last more years than I care to count. So with that, I think we're done. Unless Clint or Beth, there's something else we need to say.
Just thank you for
Clint's
taking the time.
probably muted you. All right, thanks. Clint, we muted you. I'm sorry about that. If you have anything, I've just unmuted you. So.
Oh yeah, thank you. No,
Sorry.
I think you covered it. I guess I just have so now when you go back to start working on version 2, our future meetings while that process is being undertaken, that's when we'll have time at our normal SAC meetings to be talking about these management plan issues.
I'm imagining the same thing, sir. Yes, awesome. I doubt we will be sitting looking at each other and twiddling our thumbs.
Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good afternoon.